Hey everyone! I'm your narrator, here to guide you through today's story. I know many of you use these videos to relax or fall asleep, so before we dive in, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Oh, and let me know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it? Alright, settle in, get comfy, and let's begin. The first time I realized something was wrong was when my coffee mug wasn't where I'd left it. No big deal, right? That's what I told myself. I live alone in a decent 2-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of a building in Boston. No pets, no roommates, no cleaning service, just me. So when I found my blue ceramic mug on the kitchen counter instead of in the sink, where I was sure I'd left it the night before, I brushed it off. Probably moved it without realizing it, I thought. But then, more things started happening. Little things. A drawer in my bedroom, slightly open, when I was sure I'd closed it. My keys, sitting on the coffee table, instead of hanging on the hook by the door. The dining chair, shifted 2 inches away from the table. Each time, I ignored it. Stress from work? Lack of sleep? There had to be a logical explanation. Until one morning, when I found my laptop closed. I was certain I'd left it open overnight to download updates. That's when the unease set in, a chill deep in my stomach. I checked the door. Locked. Deadbolts secured. Windows shut. No signs of forced entry. But something was off. I'm not a paranoid person. I work in software development. Facts and logic are my bread and butter. Either the code works, or it doesn't. There's no in between. So I decided to handle this rationally. First step, figure out if something was really going on or if I was losing my mind. I bought a basic security camera on Amazon. Nothing fancy, just a wireless model that connects to your phone. I set it up in the living room, angled to capture most of the common areas and the hallway leading to the bedrooms. The camera had night vision, motion detection, and cloud storage. My plan was simple, either catch something on video or prove to myself that I was being ridiculous. The first 2 nights, nothing happened. The footage showed an empty apartment. Occasionally, car headlights would cast moving shadows on the walls, but that was it. Normal. I started to feel silly for even buying the camera. And then came the 3rd night. At 3:17 a.m., my phone buzzed with a motion detection alert. My hands trembled as I opened the app. The recording was clear, thanks to the infrared night vision. I saw it, a tall, human-like figure moving slowly from the direction of my front door into the living room. It walked with purpose, like it knew the layout. Like it had been there before. The figure wore dark clothing and gloves. I couldn't make out the face. They kept their head down, and the angle didn't help. First, they went to my desk. They opened the top drawer and rummaged through it for about 30 seconds. Then, they moved to my bookshelf, running their fingers across the spines of my books. My throat went dry as I stared at the timestamp. This had happened just 4 hours earlier, while I was asleep in my bedroom, less than 40 feet away. But the worst part was yet to come. The figure turned and walked down the hallway, toward my bedroom. It stopped at my door, which was partially open. And then, it just stood there. For 6 whole minutes. For 23 seconds he stood perfectly still, watching me sleep. I could see his shadow cast on the hallway wall, unmoving. Then, he turned around and started going through my apartment, rifling through a few drawers before leaving through the front door. I reviewed the footage from previous nights. There were 3 more incidents, always between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., following the exact same pattern. The police weren't much help. I showed them the recordings, but without a clear facial identification and no signs of robbery, they said there wasn't much they could do. They suggested I change the locks and file a report. The building management wasn't helpful either. They insisted that only maintenance staff had copies of the keys, which were supposedly kept in a locked box. Regardless, they changed the locks and gave me a new set of keys, promising to look into the matter. I didn't feel reassured. I bought more cameras, 5 in total, placing 1 in every room except the bathroom. I installed motion sensor lights and alarms on the doors. I even added a chain lock and an additional deadbolt to the front door. I needed to know if they would come back, and if they did, I wanted to capture their face. A week passed without any incidents. I barely slept, constantly checking the camera recordings every hour. Dark circles appeared under my eyes, and I jumped at every sound. My coworkers noticed something was off but avoided prying. How do you tell someone that someone else has been watching you sleep? Then last night, my phone vibrated. It was 3:22 a.m. A notification, motion detected in the living room. My hands were shaking so much I could barely unlock my phone. They were back. The same dark clothing, the same careful movements. The new locks hadn't stopped them. I watched in real time as they moved through my apartment. This time, with multiple camera angles, I could track every step. When they reached the kitchen, one of the cameras captured their face as they glanced up toward a cabinet. It was a man, probably in his 40s, thin, with graying hair at the temples. I didn't recognize him. He followed the same routine, checking the desk, the drawer, the bookshelf. But this time, when he reached my bedroom door, something was different. He pushed it open wider than I had left it. I held my breath, watching as he stepped inside. Except I wasn't in bed. I was sitting in my closet, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. Through my phone, I watched him approach the pillows carefully arranged under the blankets. He stood beside the bed for nearly a minute before realizing it was empty. His head shot up abruptly. Through the bedroom camera, I saw his face clearly for the first time. His eyes were wide, scanning the room. He knew something was wrong. Then he smiled. It wasn't a cruel smile. It was something almost kind, understanding even. He walked toward the closet door and stopped. I could hear his breathing through the wooden panels. My phone screen displayed his face in sharp detail as he reached for the handle. I tightened my grip on the baseball bat in my sweaty hands and held my breath. The handle turned. The door began to open. "I was wondering when you'd stay awake for me," he said softly. I swung the bat as hard as I could. What happened next is burned into my memory in fragments. The crunch of the bat against his skull, his body hitting the floor of my bedroom, blood pooling on the carpet. My trembling fingers fumbling the phone, dialing 911 wrong twice before finally getting it right. Red and blue lights flashing through the windows. Blue lights illuminated my window, police securing the scene. Paramedics declared him dead at 3:47 a.m. The first time I saw him, I didn't think much of it. That was my mistake. It was a Tuesday, 11:43 p.m. in March. I remember glancing at my phone repeatedly, cursing the late bus. The Henderson Street stop was always deserted at that hour, just a lone metal bench under a flickering street light, surrounded by shuttered shops and empty sidewalks. The temperature had dropped to 40 degrees, and my thin jacket did little against the biting wind. I was scrolling through emails when I noticed him. A man stood about 30 feet away near the shadowy entrance of Pitt's liquor store. He wore a long black coat that reached his knees, hands buried in his pockets, staring at the brick wall. Completely still. My finger froze mid-scroll. Something about his stillness sent a chill up my spine. Normal people don't stand motionless in the cold, staring at walls. I quickly looked back at my phone but kept him in my peripheral vision. 2 minutes passed. He hadn't moved an inch. Finally, the bus lights appeared in the distance, and I got up, shifting my weight nervously from one foot to the other. The man remained frozen. When the bus screeched to a stop, I glanced at him again. This time, he had slightly turned his head, just enough for me to catch the side of his face under the dim light. His skin was pale, almost gray. His eyes, unblinking, stared straight ahead. I hurried onto the bus and slid into a seat near the middle. Through the window, I saw him still standing there as the bus pulled away. 3 days later, I got home from work around 6 p.m. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across my front yard. I live in a small house on a quiet residential street, the kind of neighborhood where everyone's been around for decades and knows everyone else's business. As I walked up the cracked concrete path with my keys in hand, something made me glance across the street. He was there. The same black coat. The same rigid posture. Standing perfectly still on the sidewalk across from my house, staring directly at my window. My stomach dropped. Fumbling with my keys, I rushed inside and locked the door. My hands trembled as I darted to the window and peeked through the blinds. He hadn't moved. He just stood there, his head slightly tilted upward, his eyes fixed on my second-floor bedroom window. Gripping my phone, I called the police. As the line rang, I kept my eyes on him. He didn't change his position, didn't check a phone, didn't even blink. When the dispatcher answered, I reported a suspicious person. She assured me they'd send a patrol car to check it out. 15 minutes later, red and blue lights flashed outside as a police car arrived on my street. But the man was gone. The officers knocked on my door. I described what I'd seen. They nodded, took notes, but it was clear they weren't concerned. Just another paranoid resident reporting a suspicious figure. They told me to call again if I saw him. That night, I double-checked every lock before heading to bed. Living alone suddenly made my house feel too big, too empty. Too many windows. Too many dark corners. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, straining to hear any sound out of place. Around 2 a.m., I heard a floorboard creak somewhere downstairs. I shot upright, heart racing. It's just the house settling, I told myself. Old houses make noise. The next morning, I checked every door and all the windows were still locked, no signs of tampering. I went to work, but I couldn't focus. My mind kept returning to that pale, expressionless face, those unblinking eyes. Over the following week, I saw him 4 more times. Always from a distance. Always completely still. Once outside my office during lunch. Another time in the supermarket parking lot while I loaded my bags into my car. Twice more outside my house, on different streets, partly hidden behind trees or parked cars. Each time, I called the police. Each time, he vanished before they arrived. I started taking different routes to work, varied my schedule, constantly glancing over my shoulder. I installed security cameras and motion sensor lights around my house. I bought pepper spray and carried it in my pocket. My coworkers noticed the dark circles under my eyes and asked if I was sleeping well. I made excuses about insomnia. Then came the night that changed everything. I woke up at 3:17 a.m. to a notification on my phone. Motion detected, rear camera. My hands trembling, I opened the app. The infrared camera showed a figure standing in my backyard, face tilted toward my bedroom window. The same black coat. The same unnatural stillness. I called 911 immediately, whispering. Even though he was outside, I watched him through the live feed. He didn't move. Not around. Just staring at my window. Suddenly, the feed went black. Connection lost. My breath caught in my throat. Then I heard it, a sound from below, something sliding across the wooden floor. Then slow, deliberate footsteps. I grabbed the pepper spray and my phone, moving silently toward my bedroom door. The steps climbed the stairs. Step. Pause. Step. Pause. The wood creaked under each careful footfall. My heart was pounding so hard, I could barely breathe. Sweat ran down my back. The steps reached the top of the stairs. A long pause. Then they started moving down the hallway toward my room. I pressed myself against the wall next to the door, trying to control my breathing. The steps grew closer. Closer. They stopped right outside my door. I could hear soft breathing on the other side of the wood. The doorknob slowly began to turn. I raised the pepper spray, adrenaline flooding my body. The door creaked open, letting in a sliver of darkness from the hallway. A pale hand gripped the edge of the door. When I saw his face appear, I sprayed. He recoiled with an inhuman scream, not one of pain, but of rage. A sound no human should be able to make. I ran for the stairs, stumbling down them, nearly falling in my panic. Behind me, the methodical steps resumed their pace. Step. Pause. Step. Pause. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't in a hurry. It was as if he knew he would eventually catch me. I reached the front door just as the red and blue lights started flashing through the windows. I flung it open and ran barefoot in my pajamas across the cold concrete. 2 police cars were pulling up. The officers already had their weapons drawn, rushing into my house, but they found nothing. No signs of forced entry. The back door was still locked. The security camera was working fine. But in my bedroom, they found wet footprints on the wooden floor. Not from shoes. They were barefoot. And they were much, much larger than a human's. With too many fingers that night, I stayed in a hotel. The next day, I started packing. I had lived in that house for 6 years, but I couldn't stay another night there. I took a week off work and found a small apartment on the other side of the city. I didn't give my new address to anyone. I installed security cameras at the entrances and checked them every night for 2 months. Everything was calm. There were no more sightings, no more footsteps in the night. Slowly, I started to relax, convincing myself that it was over. Until yesterday. I had left work late and was waiting for the bus. The bus stop was deserted, it was cold. I was checking my phone when something caught my attention. He was standing about 30 feet away, near a closed store. The same black coat, hands in his pockets, staring at the wall. I ran. I didn't wait for the bus. I didn't call the police. I didn't look back. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs shook. When I finally stopped, gasping for air in front of a 24-hour restaurant, he was standing across the street, watching. I'm writing this now from another hotel room. The glow from my laptop screen is the only light in the darkness. I've wedged a chair under the door, though I know it won't help much. The curtains are closed, but I imagine I can see a shadow standing outside my third-floor window. I don't know what he wants. I don't know why he chose me. I don't know if he's human or something else dressed in human form. All I know is that he's patient. He doesn't need to sleep. He doesn't need to eat. He can wait forever, and he's watching me right now. I can feel his eyes on me as I write this. The hairs on the back of my neck are standing up. My hands are shaking over the keyboard. There's a soft sound coming from the hallway outside my room. Step. Pause. Step. Pause. It's him. I know it's him. The footsteps are getting closer. The doorknob is starting to turn. I shouldn't have stopped at that motel. The neon sign said vacancy, and I was dead tired after driving for 16 straight hours. I just wanted to sleep. Now I'm sitting in my car, hands trembling on the wheel, trying to put distance between me and whatever happened in room 115. I need to write this while it's fresh. People need to know. It was 6 p.m. yesterday. I was driving back to Chicago from a meeting in Tennessee. My eyes kept closing on the road, and after my car swerved into the emergency lane for the 3rd time, I knew I had to stop. The Grove Motel was right off exit 237 in southern Indiana. Story 2. The Grove Motel was right off exit 237 in southern Indiana. The parking lot had only 3 cars. The paint on the wooden walls was peeling, and half of the outdoor lights didn't work. The office smelled like stale cigarettes. An old man sat behind the counter, watching Wheel of Fortune on a tiny TV. His ID badge said hello. I need a room, I said, pulling out my wallet. He didn't take his eyes off his show. Single or double? Single is fine. $55 cash. Checkout is at 11. He slid me a key tied to a plastic tag with the number 115. My room was at the end of the building. The door got stuck when I tried to open it, and I had to push with my shoulder. Inside, there was a queen-size bed with a faded blue quilt that took up almost all the space. The carpet had dark stains near the bathroom door, and a small TV sat atop a particle board dresser. A window opened to the empty field behind the motel. I dropped my travel bag and collapsed onto the bed, not bothering to change. The springs creaked under my weight, and Pat Syak's voice filtered through the walls of the neighboring room. I closed my eyes, ready to fall asleep. That's when I heard the first knock, 3 soft taps, so gentle I almost ignored them. I opened my eyes but stayed still. Probably someone at the wrong door. The knock came again, louder this time. Knock, knock, knock. Wrong room! I shouted. Silence for a few seconds, then the doorknob started turning with a metallic, scraping sound. My heart stopped. I sat up, staring at the door handle as it slowly turned back and forth. The door was locked. I had secured it when I entered, along with the bolt and the security chain, but seeing that handle move made my skin crawl. "Hey!" I yelled. "The door's locked! You have the wrong room!" The turning stopped. I heard footsteps retreating, growing fainter until they vanished. I exhaled a breath I didn't know I was holding. Just some drunk trying doors at random, I told myself. I lay back down, but my heart was still pounding. 10 minutes passed. I started to drift off again. Bang! The door rattled in its frame. I jolted upright, adrenaline flooding my system. Someone was throwing themselves against the door with all their weight. The chain rattled with every impact, the walls shaking. I jumped out of bed and backed up until I hit the opposite wall. "I'm calling the police!" I shouted, pulling out my phone. No signal, not a single bar. The banging stopped as abruptly as it had started. In the silence that followed, I could hear my ragged breathing. The ceiling light flickered, dim bright, dim bright. The TV, which had been showing a rerun of Friends, crackled with static. The image dissolved into snow, then darkness. White words appeared on the screen. "I'm coming in." My legs buckled. This couldn't be happening. It couldn't. The bathroom light began flickering too. The temperature in the room dropped at least 20 degrees. I could see my breath in little white clouds. More knocks at the door, but different this time. A rhythm. Knock, knock, pause, knock, knock, like someone asking permission to enter. The TV changed again. "Let me in," it whispered. I shook my head. "This isn't real." The knocks became faster, more insistent. The lights were flashing like a nightclub. The room spun around me. A voice crackled from the TV, distorted and grainy. "You can't keep me out forever." I pressed my hands to my ears, but the voice grew louder. "I'm already inside." The bathroom door slammed shut. Then it opened, again, faster and faster. The front door trembled in its frame. The chain was tight. The bolt started to turn on its own. I grabbed my phone and car keys and ran to the door, just as I reached the handle. Everything stopped. The lights steadied. The TV shut off. The temperature returned to normal. Silence. My hand hovered just inches from the doorknob. Sweat ran down my back. Something scratched at the door from the other side. First soft, then harder, like animal claws dragging against wood. A whisper seeped through the crack. "Open the door." I stumbled back. The voice wasn't coming from the TV. Something, was right outside. "Open the door, David." No one at the motel knew my name. The scratching moved up the door, then along the wall. I followed the sound as it circled the room, traveling through the drywall as if the wall wasn't even there. It reached the corner, above the TV, and stopped. I looked up. The ceiling bulged downward, the wallpaper stretching. There was a crack, and something was pressing down from above. A dark stain spread across the ceiling, something dripping onto the floor. Water, or perhaps something worse. The bulge grew, pushing the plaster to its limits. Suddenly, the TV turned on by itself. The screen flickered with static, showing an image of the room, my room, from an impossible angle, as if someone were filming from the ceiling. I saw myself on the screen, pale and terrified, looking up, but there was no camera. The ceiling creaked, and a crack appeared, letting dust fall from the plaster. Something passed through the crack, a hand, but it was wrong. It was too long, with too many joints, and the fingers were bent backward. The TV spoke again, this time with my voice. "You can't keep me out forever." I ran. I didn't bother to unlock the door. I slammed my shoulder into it, breaking the chain. I sprinted across the parking lot, my keys jingling in my hand as I ran toward my car. Behind me, the lights in room 115 flickered wildly, illuminating the window. For a split second, I saw the words on the TV screen before I got into my car. "See you soon." I started the engine, the tires screeching on the gravel as I sped away. In the rearview mirror, I saw a figure standing at the entrance of room 115. It raised an absurdly long arm and waved at me. That was 4 hours ago. I've been driving north since then, sticking to main roads with heavy traffic. The sun is rising now, and everything seems almost normal in the daylight, but my phone keeps glitching. Random messages appear and disappear. The screen flickers sometimes, just for a second. A few minutes ago, I received a message from an unknown number. "Thanks for letting me in." I don't know what followed me from that motel. I don't know what it wants, but I know it's not done with me. The GPS says I'm 3 hours away from Chicago. My hands are shaking so badly that I can barely hold the wheel. Every time I look in the rearview mirror, I expect to see those long fingers reaching for the back of my neck. The sun is fully up now. Traffic is starting to pick up. Other cars surround me, people heading to work or school, like it's just any other Tuesday. None of them know what's out there. None of them know what's coming. My phone vibrates again. Another message. "We're almost there." I press the accelerator harder, but I know it doesn't matter. Whatever was in room 115 is with me now. Maybe it always was. The radio turns on by itself through the static. I hear my own voice, laughing. Not exactly words, but a melody that makes my teeth ache and my head spin. I almost didn't get in. I almost called Mr. Henderson. I wanted to quit right then and there, but I've never been the kind of person who leaves a job unfinished. The singing stopped the moment my head peeked through the gap in the stairs. The shadow was there, in the center of the attic, more solid than ever. It turned toward me, and for the first time, I saw something that resembled a face, dark, hollow spaces where eyes should have been, and a deeper, blacker slit like a mouth. It raised an arm, pointing directly at me. The air grew so cold that my breath came out in visible clouds. My lantern flickered and went out. In the pitch-black darkness, I heard a lot of movement, like dozens of people crawling through the hay. But I couldn't see anything, except for that shadow, now visible even in the total darkness. I descended the stairs so quickly that I missed the last 3 steps and fell backward. I was breathless, but I didn't stop. I ran to the office, locked myself in, and called Mr. Henderson. It was 2:30 in the morning, and although he wasn't happy about being woken up, he listened. "Dan," he said after I finished telling him everything, "my grandfather used to tell stories about that barn, about things he saw in that attic when he was young. I always thought he was just trying to scare us kids, but—" He fell silent for a long time. I could hear him shuffling papers on the other end of the line. Then, finally, he spoke again. "There was an accident," he continued. "In 1947. A worker got trapped up there during a hay fire. They never found his body. The entire top of the barn burned down, but they rebuilt it. My grandfather used to say that sometimes they'd find fresh hay scattered around, even when we hadn't received a new shipment in weeks. That was 5 hours ago. Now, as the first light of dawn breaks, I'm still here in the office, writing this while I wait for Mr. Henderson to arrive. He said he's bringing someone with him. She's an expert in agricultural paranormal activity, which, to be honest, I didn't even know was a thing. From the office window, I can see the barn. It looks normal in the daylight, but I know I have to check the attic. I need to see what pattern the hay left this time, because there will be a pattern, there always is. My hands are shaking as I write this last part. I just got a text from Tommy, one of the morning shift workers, who arrived early. He went up to the attic. This time, the hay isn't scattered in a pattern. It's piled in the center of the floor, fresh, with a sweet smell, and pressed against it is something heavy, as if something, or someone, had rested there. It's the shape of a body. Tommy's message ended with, "What the hell is going on here, Dan?" I didn't know how to respond. I stared at my phone, trying to find the words. But how do you explain something you don't understand? Finally, I just wrote back, "Don't touch anything. I'm on my way with Mr. Henderson." From the office, I saw Mr. Henderson's truck pull up the gravel driveway. A woman was sitting in the passenger seat, holding a large briefcase on her lap, and what appeared to be old books sticking out of a backpack beside her. She wore thick glasses and a long coat that billowed as she got out of the truck. She looked straight at the barn as if she knew exactly where to look. When I went outside to greet them, Mr. Henderson greeted me with a look that mixed concern with resignation. "Dan, this is Dr. Marion Groves," he said. She knows about these things." I didn't know what to say, so I just shook her hand. Dr. Groves studied me for a moment, almost as if evaluating me. Then she turned toward the barn. "Show me the place," she said, without any preamble. Tommy was waiting by the barn door, his face pale, looking like he had just seen a ghost. His hands were trembling when he saw Dr. Groves. He seemed relieved, as if someone could finally make sense of everything. However, he firmly refused to go up to the attic with us. "I'm not going up there again," he said, taking a step back. "No matter what happens." We climbed the stairs, Dr. Groves leading the way, holding a strange device that emitted a faint buzzing sound and had blinking lights. Mr. Henderson and I followed, both carrying flashlights. When we reached the attic, the air was colder than usual. Although daylight filtered through the cracks, the pile of hay was exactly as Tommy had described it, stacked in the center of the floor, cool to the touch, with a sweet odor in the air. At the center of that pile, the outline of a body was clearly visible, with arms stretched out to the sides and legs close together. Dr. Groves didn't seem surprised. She pulled out a small camera and took several photos from different angles. Then, she knelt next to the hay and began examining it carefully. "This isn't just an energetic residue," she murmured. "This is something much older." Mr. Henderson and I exchanged confused glances, not understanding what that meant. I finally asked, "What does that mean?" Dr. Groves stood up, shaking her hands. "It means that whatever is here is not just a lost spirit. This is something that's been trapped for a long time and is now trying to communicate." She pointed to the north wall of the attic. "What's behind that wall?" Mr. Henderson frowned. "Nothing. Just the outer wall, reinforced. They rebuilt it after the fire." "Have you ever opened it?" she asked. "No, there's never been a need." Dr. Groves sighed and took a small hammer from her bag. "I think it's time to take a look." It took more effort than expected. The wood of that wall was solid, almost as if it were resisting on purpose. But eventually, we managed to open a panel, revealing a hidden space behind it. The air that rushed out was thick, musty, and smelled of something old, almost rotten. Inside the space, there was a small, makeshift altar made of stones and charred wood. On top of it sat a rusted metal bowl, and around it, symbols were carved into the walls, matching the exact patterns that had appeared in the hay over the past few weeks. But the most unsettling thing was in the center of the altar, a long, yellowish bone, carved with marks on its surface. It looked like a human femur. Dr. Groves stepped back, visibly disturbed. "This isn't an accident from the past. This was a ritual, And someone, got trapped here. Something that wants to get out. Mr. Henderson swallowed hard, his face paler than I had ever seen it. Can we stop it? Dr. Groves looked at him, then glanced back at the altar. Maybe. But it won't be easy. And whatever happens, we can't stop trying. Because if we don't, it won't stop here. What's in this barn is searching for something, or someone. As Dr. Groves prepared what she called a counter-ritual, the air in the attic seemed to grow heavier, as if an invisible presence was watching us. I couldn't help but keep glancing toward the shadows forming between the hay bales, half expecting to see that dark figure again. And the worst part was, I knew it wouldn't be long before it appeared. The night was getting closer, and as Dr. Groves worked silently, placing candles and marking symbols on the floor with chalk, Mr. Henderson and we stayed close, watching nervously. We didn't know exactly what to expect, but the growing pressure in the air suggested that something was building. This isn't going to be easy, said Dr. Groves, finally lifting her gaze to us. Whatever is here has been strengthening for decades. Stopping it will require channeling it into something else, something that can contain it. How do we do that? Mr. Henderson asked, his voice trembling. We'll use the altar as an anchor point, she replied. But I'll need your help. This place is strong, and it will likely try to resist. My stomach tightened when I heard that. Resist? I asked. It depends on its strength. But be prepared for strange things, very strange things, she instructed. She handed each of us a lit candle and repeated instructions in a voice that sounded odd and unnatural as she spoke the words. As we began, the atmosphere in the attic changed almost immediately. The temperature dropped sharply. The candle flames flickered but did not go out. In the shadows, figures began to move, first one, then two, and then many more. They were humanoid shapes, but twisted. Their movements were erratic, unsettling. Don't lose focus, Dr. Groves shouted over a wind that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Keep reciting the words. I did my best to keep going, even as my voice trembled. I could feel something approaching, something that seemed to push against my mind, trying to seep into my thoughts. Mr. Henderson was panting beside me, his face soaked in sweat despite the cold. Then it happened. One of the figures fully emerged from the shadows, tall and dark, with what seemed like empty eyes glowing like embers. It walked toward me with movements that weren't human, and its presence left me paralyzed. Dan! Mr. Henderson shouted, pulling at my arm. That was enough to break the hold that had frozen me, and I managed to continue reciting the words. The figure withdrew, but the air still felt heavy, as if it were fighting against us. Dr. Groves finished the last verse with a cry. The altar glowed briefly with a blinding light, and then, everything went silent. The shadows vanished. The pressure in the air disappeared, and the attic returned to stillness. We stood there, breathing heavily, while Dr. Groves knelt by the altar, clearly exhausted. Is it over? I asked, hoping her answer would be yes. She shook her head, slowly lifting her gaze to us. It's not over. But we've sealed this part. Whatever was here won't be able to get out, at least, not for now. Mr. Henderson and I exchanged glances. It wasn't the end we'd hoped for, but it was better than nothing. What do we do now? Mr. Henderson asked. Dr. Groves stood, wiping her hands on a handkerchief. Keep an eye on this place. If anything else happens, call me immediately. But remember, whatever was here has been trapped for a long time. It won't be easy to keep it sealed. We left the attic as the daylight began to fade. That night, for the first time in weeks, I didn't see any shadows or hear whispers. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over yet. For now, the farm was quiet, but deep down, I knew that whatever it was we'd called, it was still there, waiting. That silhouette in the barn loft shouldn't have been there. No one goes up there at night. In fact, no one should ever go up there. I know, because I've worked on this farm for 15 years, and I'm the only one who works the night shift, but there was something else moving in the dark, something against the moonlight that filtered through the cracks in the ceiling. I froze at the entrance, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the empty air where the figure had been just moments before. The usual nighttime sounds of the farm filled the air around me, crickets chirping, livestock shifting in their stalls, the distant hum of the generator, but something felt off. The air felt heavier somehow, like something was wrong. My name is Dan Mitchell, and I've been the night watchman at Riverside Farm since 2009. I know every inch of this place, the creak of every floorboard, the loose nails in the barn. The owner, Mr. Henderson, trusts me to keep things running smoothly while everyone else is asleep. Usually, that means checking on the animals, securing the equipment, and walking the perimeter a few times during my shift. Nothing exciting ever happens after dark. At least, it never used to. Everything started one Tuesday night in October. The temperature had dropped to the low 40s, and I was doing my usual round at 2 a.m. The main barn is always my first stop. It's the biggest building on the property, where most of our dairy cows are kept and where we store supplies. I had just finished checking the temperature on the milk tank when I heard it, the faint rustle of something moving on the wooden floor directly above me. I aimed my flashlight at the ceiling, and the beam caught particles of dust floating in the air, but nothing seemed out of place. Then I heard it again, a distinct sound of footsteps coming from the attic. At first, I thought it was raccoons. We get them sometimes, especially during the colder months when they're looking for shelter. But this sound was too heavy, too deliberate to be a raccoon. The ladder to the attic creaked under my weight as I climbed, each step making my heart beat faster. Normally, I'm not the nervous type, but something about this felt different from the usual nighttime disturbances. When I reached the top, I swept my flashlight across the space. Bales of hay were stacked almost to the ceiling on my right, creating narrow walkways between them. On my left was an open space that stretched to the back wall where we store loose hay. That's when I saw it. A shadowy, human-shaped figure gliding between the bales. It was tall, maybe over 6 feet, and moved in a way that made my skin crawl. It didn't walk, didn't run, it seemed to just glide. The beam of my flashlight passed right through the spot where it had been, revealing only hay and old wood. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice echoing in the empty space. "This is private property." But there was no response, just the usual sounds of the barn and my own breathing, which had quickened without me realizing it. I moved forward, checking between every row of hay bales. Nothing. No footprints in the dust, no hay disturbed, no sign that anyone had been there. I spent another 20 minutes searching the attic, every corner, every possible hiding spot. Nothing. Finally, I convinced myself it was just my imagination. Too many sleepless nights, too much coffee, my eyes playing tricks in the dark. I descended the ladder and finished my rounds. The next morning, before heading home, I passed through the barn as usual. Everything seemed normal at first. But then I noticed something odd. There was fresh hay scattered across the attic floor, forming an irregular circle about 3 meters wide. The nearby bales were untouched, their twine still tight and unbroken, but that hay was definitely new. I could smell it, the sweet scent of fresh grass that fades after a few days of storage. I know exactly when each hay delivery arrives at this farm. We hadn't received new hay in weeks, and no one, absolutely no one, had been in that attic between my night shift and the morning. The doors stay locked, and I have the only key at night. I snapped some photos with my phone and I sent them to Mr. Henderson. He came to look for himself, but he didn't have an explanation either. We reviewed the security cameras, but there was nothing. Just images from the outside of the barn, empty, all night long. No one entering, no one leaving. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, it's happened several more times, always the same pattern. I see the shadowy figure in the attic, and it disappears when I investigate. The next morning, I find fresh straw scattered in different shapes, sometimes a circle, other times a square. Once, it even looked like an arrow pointing towards the north wall of the barn. I've started keeping a log of each incident. October 15th, first sighting, a circle of straw. October 18th, brief shadow, square pattern the next morning. October 23rd, more visible shadow, seemed to be watching me, triangular pattern. October 27th, 2 shadows, this time an arrow pointing north. November 1st, the shadow moved more erratically, spiral pattern. November 5th, I heard whispers near the shadow, star-shaped pattern. November 8th, last night, the shadow tried to reach me. I still haven't checked the attic. The other workers think I'm losing my mind. They laugh and make jokes about Dan's ghost during shift changes, but they're not here at night. They don't feel the weight in the air when the shadow appears, nor do they hear the whispers that sound almost like words but not quite. Mr. Henderson suggested installing cameras in the attic, so we placed 4 last week, covering every angle. They record everything onto a hard drive in the office, but every time an incident happens, the footage shows nothing but empty space where I saw the shadow. The straw still appears, scattered in those strange patterns, but there's no record of how it gets there. The cameras don't malfunction or show static like those ghost hunting shows. They just show empty air. I've tried other things. I set up traps with string, scattered flour on the floor to capture footprints, even brought my German Shepherd, Rex, one night. But the dog whimpered and refused to go up the stairs. Last night was different. Last night, everything changed. I was doing my usual check at 2 a.m. when I heard something new from the attic, singing. No one else should have been there. Not at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. The parking lot was my personal concrete cave at that hour. It had been for the last 3 years of night shifts at Morton and Associates, until tonight. The footsteps started when I was on the 3rd level. At first, I thought it was just the sound of my dress shoes against the concrete, the usual echo bouncing off the low ceiling. But then I stopped. The footsteps kept going. I stood still, holding my heavy briefcase in my right hand, listening. The sound came from somewhere behind me, the click of hard soles against the firm concrete, deliberate and steady. My heart raced. I turned slowly, scanning the rows of empty spaces and concrete pillars. Nothing moved under the harsh fluorescent lights. The footsteps stopped too. "Hello?" I called. My voice sounded weaker than I intended, swallowed up by the vast emptiness. No response. I started walking again, faster this time, trying to keep my steps quiet. My car was right ahead, my black Honda Civic, parked alone in the corner where I always left it, far from the daytime cars that had long since disappeared. I didn't dare turn around. I couldn't. I stood there, staring at my phone screen, listening. Then I heard it, the soft click of dress shoes on wooden floors, coming from somewhere in my apartment. The footsteps were closer now, out in the hallway outside my bedroom. I'm sitting at my desk, writing this as fast as I can because people need to know what happened to me. The doorknob is turning slowly. They're here. The Buick is still waiting, every night, somewhere on an empty road. The old car is parked with its fogged-up windows and the handprints moving. And if you ever decide to take the detour to a diner in the middle of nowhere, you might find it. Or maybe it's waiting for you. The sun had barely disappeared behind the mountains when I saw the gas station sign at the side of the road. The gas gauge needle was dangerously close to empty, and the warning light was already flashing. I had no choice. I took the exit, leaving the main highway behind. The road was narrow, flanked by tall trees that darkened the sky above me. Finally, the small station appeared in front of me, an old, rusty pair of pumps next to a flickering fluorescent sign. A sense of unease settled in my chest as I slowed down and parked next to one of the pumps. The place was empty, except for an old black Buick parked under the dim light of a street lamp. Its windows were fogged, but I couldn't see any signs of movement. I opened my car door, and the cold air hit me, carrying away some of my nervousness. I walked toward the pump, pulled out the nozzle, and began filling the tank. The meter turned slowly, each click resonating in the silence. As I waited, I looked around. There was no one in the small convenience store by the pumps, and even with the lights on, the place seemed abandoned. My eyes drifted back to the Buick. Something was wrong. There were smudges on the fogged glass, but they weren't static. They moved, as if someone was pressing their hands against the inside, then dragging them. My throat went dry. I couldn't look away. Suddenly, a loud thud came from the other side of the pump. I instinctively spun around, my heart racing. There was nothing, just the shadow of my car under the light. I looked back at the Buick, but this time, there were no smudges. The windows were clear. The pump clicked, signaling that the tank was full. I quickly put the nozzle back, eager to leave. But something stopped me. The Buick's door creaked open slowly, the metallic sound cutting through the air. I saw a leg step out, followed by another. A tall, thin figure straightened up, adjusting its hat. I couldn't see its face. I took a step back, my breath quick and shallow. I didn't want to turn my back, but my legs shook, urging me to run. The figure started walking toward me. Its steps were slow and deliberate, echoing in the gravel. "Hey!" I shouted, trying to sound firm. "What do you want?" It didn't answer. Its walk was strange, too fluid, like it had no joints. I took another step back, then another. My hand fumbled for the keys in my pocket, but my clumsy fingers dropped them to the ground. The figure stopped just a few feet away. Now, under the light, I could see its face. It had no eyes, just two black voids where they should have been. A wide, disproportionate smile stretched across its face, with sharp, glowing teeth under the dim light. "Need some help?" it asked, its voice distorted, like several people speaking at once. I didn't wait to find out. I bent down, grabbed the keys, and ran for my car. I jumped in, slammed the door, and started the engine. The Buick wasn't behind me. I checked the rearview mirror again and again as I drove away. The road was empty. But then, my phone on the passenger seat vibrated. A message from an unknown number appeared on the screen. "Why are you leaving so quickly?" "I just wanted to chat." I glanced at the rearview mirror. The yellow headlights of the Buick were back, following me, unyielding, as if I had never escaped. The yellow headlights of the Buick remained behind me, unblinking. Each time I looked in the mirror, it felt like they were getting a little closer, even though they stayed the same exact distance, as if they were playing with me. I floored the gas pedal. The Honda's engine roared as it reached 80 miles per hour. The road was straight, lined with trees that closed in like threatening shadows. The phone vibrated again on the passenger seat. Another message appeared on the screen. "You're wasting your time running. I'm always here." I ignored it, focusing on the road, but my mind was a mess. My hands gripped the wheels so tightly my knuckles turned white. Then, the Buick's headlights disappeared. For a moment, I thought it was over. My chest relaxed slightly, but my breathing started to calm down. But just when I began to believe I was safe, the Buick's headlights reappeared, this time, directly in front of me, coming from the opposite direction. My reflexes took over, and I jerked the wheel, swerving off the road and onto the gravel. My car slid before finally stopping in a small clearing. The Buick's engine roared as it passed me, but it didn't keep going. Instead, it slowly turned and stopped a few feet away, blocking my way out. My phone vibrated again. "It's time to end this." The Buick's door opened, and the same figure emerged. Their body was bathed in the yellowish glow of the headlights. That same unsettling, wide, disproportionate smile still lingered on their face, as if they were savoring the fear I felt. They walked toward me, their footsteps echoing against the gravel. I opened my car door, but my legs felt like lead, as though my body refused to move. "Why do you always run?" they asked, tilting their head unnaturally. "This is inevitable." My heart was racing so fast that I felt lightheaded. Then the figure raised a hand, and the Buick's lights began to flicker. The light illuminated the clearing erratically, revealing something I hadn't noticed before: shadows. But these weren't ordinary shadows. Evil. Each tree, each rock cast elongated figures that moved on their own, converging toward my car. Suddenly, I felt a chill on my neck. "I warned you," a voice said from behind me. I didn't have time to react before everything went dark. I woke up in my car, parked at the side of the highway. The sun was rising, and traffic had begun to fill the road. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard, 6:47 a.m. Everything seemed normal. My phone was on the passenger seat with no new messages. The gas tank was full, though I didn't remember filling it. I slowly sat up, feeling pain in my neck. When I looked in the rearview mirror, I noticed a dark mark, as though a cold hand had pressed there. The Buick was gone, but I knew this wasn't over. Every time I pass a gas station now, I carefully check the parked cars. I look for fogged-up windows and handprints because I know he's still out there, waiting. And next time, I might not be so lucky. I shouldn't have stopped at that motel. The sign said vacant in red neon, but it was already late, and after driving 16 straight hours, I just wanted a place to sleep. But now, as I drive with trembling hands gripping the wheel, trying to shake off what happened in room 115, I know it was a mistake. I need to write this down before it's too late, while I can still remember it clearly. People need to know what happened. It was around 6 p.m. when I decided to stop. I was driving back to Chicago after a meeting in Tennessee, but my eyes couldn't stay open. For the third time, my car veered off the road and hit the rough patches of the shoulder. The Grove Motel appeared ahead, just off exit 237 in southern Indiana. The building's paint was peeling, and only 3 cars were in the parking lot. Half of the exterior lights were out. I walked into the office, where the air was thick with the smell of stale cigarettes. Behind the counter sat an elderly man, watching Wheel of Fortune on a tiny TV. His name tag said, Earl. "I need a room," I said, pulling out my wallet. Earl didn't look away from the screen. "Single or double?" he asked. "Single. $1.55 cash. Checkout's at 11. He slid me a key with a plastic tag that read, 115. My room was at the far end of the building. I had to push the door with my shoulder to open it. Inside, there was a queen-size bed with a faded blue bedspread and a small TV perched on a cheap dresser. The wallpaper was yellowed, and the carpet had dark stains near the bathroom. I dropped my travel bag on the floor and collapsed onto the bed. I didn't even bother changing clothes. The mattress creaked under my weight. Through the thin walls, I could hear someone watching TV in the next room. I closed my eyes, ready to sleep. Then I heard the first knock. 3 quick raps, so light I almost didn't notice them. I opened my eyes but stayed still. Probably someone at the wrong door. The knock came again, this time louder. "Knock, knock, knock. You've got the wrong room," I shouted. No response. After a few seconds, the doorknob started to turn, making a metallic sound. My heart raced, pounding in my chest. I sat there, watching as the doorknob slowly turned from one side to the other. I knew I had locked the door securely. I had also ensured the chain and the bolt were in place. But seeing the doorknob move made my skin crawl. "Hey! The door is locked! You have the wrong room!" I shouted. The doorknob stopped turning, and I heard footsteps retreating, the sound fading until it disappeared completely. I let out a long sigh. It was probably just some drunk person trying doors at random. I leaned back again, but my heartbeat was still racing. About 10 minutes passed, and I began to drift off again, when suddenly, bang! The door shook violently in its frame. I sat up abruptly, adrenaline coursing through my body. Someone was slamming into the door with force, and the chain vibrated with every impact. I jumped out of bed, backing up until I hit the opposite wall. "I'm calling the cops!" I yelled, pulling my phone out of my pocket. There was no signal, not a single bar. The banging stopped abruptly. The room fell into complete silence, save for my uneven breathing. Then, out of nowhere, the ceiling light began to flicker, dim, bright, dim, bright. The TV, which had been playing an episode of Friends, crackled with static. The image vanished, leaving the screen entirely black. And then, in stark white letters, words appeared. "I'm coming in." My legs went weak. This couldn't be happening. The bathroom started making noises, the door opening and slamming shut, over and over again. The bolt on the main door began to turn on its own. The room's temperature dropped rapidly, and I could see my breath. "You can't keep me out forever," a distorted voice said, coming from the TV. I grabbed my keys and phone, and I ran toward the door. I slammed my shoulder into it, breaking the chain, and rushed outside toward my car. When I reached the parking lot, I glanced back. Room 115 blinked like a lighthouse, its lights flickering, illuminating the interior. On the TV screen through the window, I could see the words, "See you soon." I started the engine and sped off, gravel flying behind my tires. In my rearview mirror, I saw a figure standing in the doorway, lifting a long arm to wave at me. That was 4 hours ago. I've been driving non-stop north, sticking to major roads, surrounded by other cars. The sun is beginning to rise, casting light on the horizon, and everything almost seems normal with the new day dawning. But something's wrong. My phone keeps acting strange. Random messages pop up and disappear. The screen flickers for a second, then normalizes. Just a few minutes ago, I received a message from an unknown number. "Thanks for letting me in." Sweat beads on my palms as I grip the steering wheel. I don't know what followed me from that motel. I don't know what it wants, but I know it's not done with me. The GPS says I'm 3 hours from Chicago. My eyes constantly scan the rearview mirror, waiting to see something, waiting to see him. The traffic starts to pick up. People are going to work or taking their kids to school, like it's just another Tuesday. None of them know what's out here. None of them know what's coming. My phone vibrates again, another message. "We're almost there." I push the accelerator harder, but I know it doesn't matter. Whatever was in room 115, it's with me now. Maybe it always was. The radio turns on by itself through the static. I hear laughter, my own laughter. I don't remember laughing like that. The first sign that something was wrong was the creak of the wooden floor downstairs. It was 2:47 a.m., and the house was completely dark. I live alone, so hearing any noise at that hour was enough to make my heart start pounding. I stayed frozen in bed, holding my breath. The sound repeated, a slow, deliberate creak, like someone was trying to move without making a sound. At first, I thought it could be the wind or the old heating system, but I quickly ruled that out. These steps were too distinct, too human. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and turned on the flashlight. I didn't want to call the police just yet. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I was just imagining things. I slipped on my slippers and crept toward my bedroom door. I opened it slowly, the hinges breaking the silence. The hallway was empty, illuminated only by the faint moonlight coming through a window at the far end. "Hello?" I called, my voice barely a whisper. There was no response. I descended the stairs, holding my phone like a weapon. Each step made a small sound against the wood, and I felt like every creak betrayed my position. When I reached the first floor, I swept the area with the light of my phone. Everything was in its place: the couch, the coffee table, the shelves, except for the back door. It was slightly ajar. I approached cautiously, my breath quick and shallow. The cold air poured in through the gap in the door, making the hairs on my arms stand up. I extended my hand. I slammed the door shut, twisting the lock with force. As I did, I heard another sound. This time, it didn't come from the floor, but from behind me, right behind me. It was a whisper, so faint that I barely caught it. "You shouldn't have done that." I spun around sharply, shining my phone's light into the room. There was no one there. Panic set in as I ran to the kitchen, grabbed a knife from the block. My mind raced, trying to come up with a logical explanation. Maybe it was the wind, I told myself. Maybe I had left the door open without realizing it. But then, the sound of something dragging across the floor upstairs shattered my thoughts. The knife trembled in my hand as I stared at the stairs. Something was in my room. The dragging sound from above was slow, deliberate, like someone or something was moving carefully, trying not to make too much noise. I tightened my grip on the knife, trying to muster enough courage to climb the stairs. My breath came in quick, shallow gasps, each inhale echoing too loudly in the silence of the house. "Who's there?" I yelled, my voice shaking. There was no answer. Only the relentless dragging sound from my bedroom. I took the first step, then the second. The wood creaked under my weight, and I froze, waiting for some sort of reaction. But nothing. Halfway up the stairs, the house fell into complete silence. The dragging had stopped. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to hear any other sound. When I reached the top, the hallway was just as I had left it, empty, bathed in the pale light of the moon. My room was at the end, the door slightly ajar, exactly as I had left it. I moved forward slowly, my sweaty hand gripping the knife. The air felt colder here, as though someone had left a window open, but I knew that wasn't possible. I had checked all the locks before going to bed. I pushed the door open carefully, my phone's light illuminating the room inside. The bed was a mess, the sheets scattered on the floor. The window was still closed, and the wardrobe door was slightly ajar, revealing only impenetrable darkness. I stepped inside, my gaze scanning every corner. I moved closer to the wardrobe, each step feeling like an eternity. Grabbing the wardrobe door with one hand, the knife poised in the other, I swung it open sharply. Empty. I exhaled a sigh of relief, lowering the knife slowly. Maybe I had been imagining things. Then I saw it. A reflection in the mirror next to the bed. A tall, hunched figure standing behind me. Its face was blurry, but its eyes gleamed brightly, burning in the darkness. I turned around instantly, raising the knife. But there was no one. The air around me grew heavier, as though something invisible had filled the room. I heard another whisper, this time clearer, as if it was coming from everywhere. "Why do you close the doors?" My throat tightened, and a chill ran down my spine. Suddenly, the door to my room slammed shut with a bang, the sound reverberating throughout the house. My phone fell to the ground, the lights spinning erratically before cutting out. I was plunged into darkness. The sound of rapid footsteps echoed down the hall, and something slammed against the door, again and again, as if trying to get in. "Go away!" I screamed, my voice cracking with panic. The banging stopped instantly. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, a final whisper, almost a murmur. "I'm inside." My hand shook as I tried to pick up the phone from the floor, but it wouldn't work. The battery was dead, or at least that's what it seemed. Something moved behind me. The cold was the last thing I felt before everything went black. I slowly opened my eyes. My limbs were numb, my mind foggy. I was lying on the floor of my room, the morning light streaming through the window. I sat up with difficulty, every muscle in my body protesting the effort. Everything seemed normal, but there was something wrong. The sheets were still scattered on the floor, and the knife was just a few inches away from me. My phone remained off, its screen cracked. But what really unsettled me was the mirror. Something was written on it in twisted, uneven letters as though someone had scratched it with long nails. "We'll see each other soon." I instinctively recoiled, stumbling into the corner of the bed. I looked around, expecting to see some sign of what had happened, but everything else seemed normal. I ran to the mirror, trying to wipe away the words with the sleeve of my shirt, but they wouldn't budge. They weren't just surface marks. They were etched into the glass. The sound of my breathing filled the room. It was the only noise after what felt like an eternity. I picked up my phone and I made my way to the bathroom. I needed water, something to ground me, something to connect me back to reality. The cold water against my face brought me some clarity, but when I lifted my head to look into the bathroom mirror, the reflection wasn't mine. It was the figure from the night before. Its eyes gleamed in the dim light, and its smile was wider than any human mouth should be able to stretch. "I told you not to close the doors," it whispered, the words echoing in my head. I screamed and backed away, but I stumbled into something that hadn't been there before. The knife had reappeared, right behind me. I picked it up instinctively. But when I turned around, the bathroom was empty. The mirror only reflected my pale, disheveled face. I ran out of the house, not daring to look back, the knife still clutched tightly in my hand. My breath was erratic as I got into my car and started the engine. I looked one last time toward my bedroom window. The figure was there, staring at me, a hand raised as if to wave. I slammed my foot down on the gas pedal and sped away, as fast as I could. Since that night, I haven't gone back to my house. I'd been living in a motel with the lights always on, the doors reinforced with furniture. I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I hear the whisper. I'm inside. I'm not sure here is safe. I know I'm not safe anywhere. It's been days since I left my house. I checked into a cheap motel by the side of the road, far from the city. I thought that by putting some distance between myself and that house, things would return to normal. But they didn't. Everything started over again. The second night at the motel, I was lying on the bed with the lights on, the motel's kitchen knife resting on the nightstand. I had barely slept since what happened at my house. Fatigue was creeping in, and little by little, I began to drift off. A sharp knock woke me up. I opened my eyes in a panic, my heart pounding in my chest. At first, I thought I had imagined it, but then I heard it again. A heavy knock, like something was slamming against the door of my room. I looked at the clock on the wall, 3:17 a.m. I slowly got up, the knife already in my hand. The knock came again, followed by a rhythmic scratching sound on the wood. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice weaker than I expected. The first time I saw him, I didn't think much of it. It was just another Tuesday night at 11:43 p.m., on a cold March evening. I was at the bus stop on Henderson Street, cursing the bus's lateness. The stop was always empty at that hour, just a metal bench under a flickering streetlight, surrounded by closed shops and empty sidewalks. The icy wind cut through my thin jacket, making me shiver. I was checking my emails on my phone when something caught my eye. A man was standing about 30 feet away, near the dark entrance of Pete's liquor store. He wore a long black coat that reached his knees, his hands shoved in his pockets, standing completely still, staring at the brick wall. My finger froze on the screen. Something about his stillness made me uneasy. Normal people don't stand like that in the cold, staring at walls. I tried to turn my attention back to my phone but kept him in my peripheral vision. 2 minutes later, he hadn't moved a single inch. Finally, I saw the bus lights in the distance. I stood up, shifting my weight from one foot to the other, restless. The man remained motionless. When the bus screeched to a stop, I quickly glanced at him before getting on. He had turned his head just slightly, enough for me to see the side of his face. His skin was pale, almost gray. His eyes were fixed forward, unblinking. I hurried onto the bus. my heart racing faster than it should. I told myself I was being paranoid. Cities are full of weird people. I'd probably never see him again. I was wrong. 3 days later, I came home from work around 6 p.m. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the neighborhood. I live in a small house on a quiet residential street, the kind of place where everyone knows their neighbors. I was going about my usual routine when something made me glance toward the opposite sidewalk. He was there. The same black coat, the same rigid posture. He was standing perfectly still, staring directly at my house, directly at my second-floor window. My stomach sank. Trembling, I fumbled with my keys, finally managing to unlock the door. I slammed it shut behind me and ran straight to the window. I pulled back the curtains just enough to peek outside. He was still there, his head tilted slightly upward, eyes locked on my window. With shaking hands, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. As it rang, I kept my eyes on him. He didn't move. He didn't look away. He didn't even blink. I told the operator about the suspicious man outside my house, and they assured me that an officer would be on the way. 15 minutes later, the red and blue lights of a patrol car lit up my street. I looked outside, but he was gone. The officer knocked on my door, and I told him everything I had seen. He nodded, made some notes, and said they would increase patrols in the area. But deep down, I knew they wouldn't take it seriously. Who would? That night, I checked the locks 3 times before going to bed. But I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark, my ears straining to catch any sounds that seemed out of place. Around 2 a.m., I heard a creak downstairs. My heart raced. I jumped out of bed, telling myself it was just the house settling, an old building creaking. But no matter how much I tried, I couldn't fall asleep again. Over the next week, I saw him several more times, always in different places but always watching me. In the office parking lot, at the grocery store as I loaded my bags into the car, and twice outside my house. Each time, I called the police, but by the time they arrived, he was always gone. My nerves were fraying. I installed security cameras and motion sensor lights. I bought pepper spray and kept it in my pocket. I changed my daily routine, taking different routes to work and coming home at different times. Then, one night, everything changed. I woke up at 3:17 a.m. to a notification on my phone. Motion detected, backyard camera. With trembling hands, I opened the app. There he was, standing in my backyard, his face tilted toward my bedroom window. The same black coat, the same still posture. I dialed 911, whispering as I watched the live feed. I explained that someone was on my property, and as I waited for the police, he didn't move. He just kept staring at my window. Suddenly, the feed cut out, lost connection. I felt my breath catch in my throat. Then I heard it, a faint sound at first, like something sliding across the floor, followed by footsteps slowly creeping up the stairs. I grabbed the pepper spray and my phone, hiding behind my bedroom door. I heard every creak of the stairs, every deliberate pause between his steps. Step. Pause. Step. Pause. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. I could hear his breath, soft and steady. The doorknob slowly began to turn. Adrenaline coursing through my veins, I raised the pepper spray, ready. When the door swung open, and I saw his face, I sprayed. What followed wasn't a human scream. It was an inhuman roar, a sound of pure rage. I jumped past him and bolted down the stairs, taking them 3 at a time, too scared to look back. I slammed the front door open just as the red and blue lights of the patrol cars illuminated the street. I ran straight for the officers, shouting for help. They searched the house but found no one. All the doors and windows were locked, and the cameras were functioning normally. However, in the hallway floor, they found wet footprints. They weren't from shoes. They were bare footprints, larger than normal, with too many toes. I stayed in a hotel that night, The next day, I packed up, changing my routine once again, cutting all ties with my old life. For 2 months, everything was calm. Then last night, while waiting for the bus late in the evening, I saw him again. He was standing under a street lamp, staring at the brick wall, just like the first time. I didn't look back. I ran. And now I am writing this from another hotel, with the door secured by a chair. But no matter what I do, he always finds me. He doesn't need to sleep, he doesn't need to eat, he can wait forever. And I know that someday, I won't be able to escape. Silence. I carefully approached the door, peeking through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but the air around me felt heavier, as though something invisible was filling the room. A sudden chill ran through my body, and then the scratching sound stopped. That's when the room phone rang. The sudden ring startled me, almost making me drop the knife I was holding. I looked at the phone, frozen in fear. Finally, I gathered the courage to pick up the receiver. "Hello?" I asked, my voice trembling. For a moment, there was no response. Then, a familiar whisper came through the line. "I knew you wouldn't escape." I hung up immediately, my hand shaking. The silence returned, but it didn't last long. A low, constant sound began to fill the room, like a murmur coming from everywhere at once. The television, which had been off since I arrived, suddenly turned on by itself. The screen was static at first, but then words started to form. "You can't escape." I backed up until my back hit the wall, my breath out of control. The screen flickered, and for a split second, I saw the figure again, smiling with those black eyes like the void. The lights in the room flickered, and the knife dropped from my hands when something cold touched my shoulder. I spun around, but there was no one there. "Leave me alone!" I screamed, my voice cracking. The murmur turned into a deafening scream. The TV exploded in sparks, and the lights went out, plunging the room into complete darkness. In the silence, a whisper echoed. "Final. I'm always inside." I was on the floor, surrounded by broken glass. The ceiling lights flickered, and the room was a complete mess. I don't know how I got out of there, but now, I'm writing this from my car parked somewhere at the edge of the road. I know this isn't over. I can feel it. Every shadow, every reflection, every sound reminds me that I'm not alone. I don't know how much longer I can keep running. I'm fleeing aimlessly. The roads seem endless, and my reflection in the rearview mirror shows a face I don't recognize, deep dark circles under my eyes, a pale face, and eyes filled with paranoia. The car starts flashing warnings on the dashboard. My gas tank is nearly empty, and my options are running out quickly. Finally, I see a sign on the side of the road. "Gas station 2 miles ahead." I hesitate. I don't want to stop, but I have no other choice. The engine won't make it much farther. When I arrive, the place is in ruins, an old, rusted gas station with a single pump that looks like it hasn't worked in years. The neon sign flickers weakly, reading, "Open," although no one seems to be around. I take a deep breath and get out of the car. The wind blows cold and dry, carrying with it a strange metallic smell. I walk toward the pump, hoping it might work, but when I try to use it, the handle is stuck. "Perfect," I mutter to myself, frustrated. I look over at the convenience store. There are lights on inside, although the windows are covered in dust. I gather my courage and go inside. The door creaks loudly as it opens, and I'm immediately hit with the smell of dampness and mold. The shelves are half empty, with expired products and dust collected in every corner. "Hello?" I call, my voice echoing through the empty space. No one answers. I walk toward the counter, where there's a small bell. I ring it, and the sound reverberates like an echo in the solitude of the place. Suddenly, a figure appears behind the counter so quickly that I jump back. It's an older man, his face wrinkled, his eyes deep set in the shadows of his face. I didn't hear him approach. "Do you need something?" he asks in a hoarse voice. Gasoline, I reply, trying to keep my calm. The man nods slowly, as if processing my words, and points to a panel on the wall. Activate the pump from there, he says. As I walk toward the panel, something about his voice makes me uneasy. There's a coldness in his tone, like he's looking right through me. I activate the pump and quickly return to the car, glancing around with every passing second. Then I see it. The black SUV parked across the lot, its windows fogged up. And the handprints. I jumped into the car, twisting the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I slammed on the accelerator, speeding towards the road without a glance behind me. As I distanced myself, my phone on the passenger seat vibrated. An unknown number flashed on the screen. A message appeared. Where do you think you're going? I'm still here. I threw the phone onto the floor, but the buzzing continued, echoing in my ears like a scream. The yellowish headlights of the Buick appeared in my rearview mirror, trailing me at the exact same distance, unbreakable, relentless. Inside, I knew the truth. No matter how fast I ran, no matter how much I hid, it was always there, within me. The Buick stayed at the same distance, as though playing with me. Its yellowish headlights lit up the road behind me, but never enough to reveal the driver, if there even was one. My breathing became erratic, my mind struggling to maintain its logic. There was no way out of this. I couldn't stop, but I couldn't keep driving forever either. The road began to twist, and the trees on both sides closed in like living shadows. I glanced at the fuel gauge. I had just filled the tank, but the needle was dropping faster than usual, as though something was draining it. My phone kept vibrating on the floor. I picked it up with trembling hands. A new message from that unknown number flashed across the screen. It doesn't matter where you go, you're already trapped. The Buick accelerated. I saw it coming closer in the rearview mirror, slowly closing the gap between us. My foot pressed harder on the accelerator, but my car hesitated, its engine roaring in protest. The road ahead split into two, no signs to guide me. Without thinking, I turned right, the tires screeching. The Buick followed suit. The path narrowed, and the branches of the trees scraped against the sides of my car, like fingers trying to reach for me. The Buick was so close now that I could hear its low engine purring. Suddenly, its lights flashed. For a moment, everything went silent, except for the sound of my own engine and my erratic breathing. Then I saw it. It was right in front of me, the Buick motionless, blocking the road. The windows, no longer fogged, were wide open, and a familiar face stared at me from the driver's seat. It was my face, my eyes, but darker, almost hollow, and staring back at me with a twisted smile. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding on the gravel. I jumped out immediately, stumbling as the cold of the night enveloped me. The Buick stayed there, its engine humming softly. The driver didn't move. "What do you want from me?" I screamed, my voice echoing through the woods. The figure in the driver's seat tilted its head, the smile widening. Then, the Buick's door slowly creaked open. I didn't wait to see who would step out. I ran towards the forest, my heart pounding. Branches and leaves ripped at my clothes and skin. I had no idea where I was going. All I knew was that I had to get away. The hum of the Buick's engine seemed to follow me, even between the trees. With every step, it felt as though something invisible was chasing me. I tripped and fell to the ground, gasping for breath as I looked behind me. There was nothing. But then, a cold whisper in my ear. "You'll never escape." I opened my eyes. I was back in my car, parked in the same spot at the fork in the road. The engine was off, and the Buick was gone. My phone, resting on the passenger seat, vibrated one more time. A final message appeared. "See you soon." I stared at the empty road ahead, my mind consumed by a single thought. This isn't over. The following days became a blur of paranoia. I left the car in an abandoned parking lot on the outskirts of the city. unable to bear the thought of driving again. Now, everything seemed like a threat, the shadows in the corners, the reflections in the glass, even the silence. My phone kept sending messages, even though I turned it off. I took the battery out, but sometimes, while I was sleeping, I could hear it vibrating, as if the messages were seeping directly into my dreams. Each one said the same thing. "We'll see each other soon." One night, while I was trying to rest on the motel couch, something changed. I woke up at 3:17 a.m., my heart pounding in my chest for no apparent reason. The room was pitch black, except for the faint glow of a street lamp filtering through the curtains. Everything was silent, too silent. Then I heard it. A soft knock, like a finger tapping on the door. Knock, knock, knock. I froze. The sound seemed to echo inside my skull. "Who's there?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. There was no answer. I slowly approached the door, each step feeling like I was walking toward my own doom. I peered through the peephole, expecting to find nothing but emptiness. Instead, I saw it. The Buick parked just outside the motel entrance, its windows fogged up as always. The driver's side door was open, and the familiar figure was standing next to it, staring directly at me. It was my reflection again, but more worn, darker. Its hollow eyes glowed under the street lamp. The knock came again, this time louder. Knock, knock, knock. I stepped back, my breath growing more erratic. "Leave me alone!" I shouted. The knocking stopped, but then a whisper came from the other side of the door, low and cold. "I'm always inside." I spun around, searching for something, anything, to protect myself. When I looked back, the motel door was wide open, and the Buick, along with the figure, had vanished. The air in the room was freezing, the lights flickered and went out, plunging me into complete darkness. Then I felt it, a cold breath on my neck. "What do you think you can run?" I woke up at dawn, lying on the floor. The door was locked and secured, but the words, "You can't escape," were written in something dark on the bathroom mirror. I know I can't keep running. No matter where I go, the Buick always finds me. The figure is always behind me, waiting, lurking. Every time I close my eyes, I see it. I know that eventually, when I'm too tired to fight, it will take my place. I decided to do something I had never considered before, face it. I couldn't keep running. Every step I took seemed to bring me back to the same place, the same moment. If it wanted something from me, I'd find out that night. At 3:17 a.m. I waited. I sat in the middle of the motel room, the lights off, a knife in my hand, and my phone, untouched since the last time it vibrated. The window was slightly open, letting the cold early morning air in like a warning. The first sound I heard was the engine, the low growl of the Buick rumbling outside the motel. I didn't look out the window. I didn't need to. I knew it was there, waiting for me. Then, the knocks came again. Knock, knock, knock. I didn't move. "Come in," I said, my voice trembling but steady. For a moment, silence took over the room, as if the entire world was holding its breath. Then, the motel door creaked open slowly with a long, painful squeal. The figure entered, hunched and silent, its face still hidden in shadows. It closed the door behind it, and stepped toward me, each footstep echoing on the wooden floor. "Why are you running?" it asked, its voice a grotesque version of my own. "I'm not running," I replied, lifting the knife. "Tell me what you want." It stopped a meter away from me, tilting its head as if considering my question. Its eyes, two dark voids, glowed with something that resembled satisfaction. "What do I want?" it repeated, its smile widening. "I want what's mine." "You have nothing here," I said, even though deep inside, I knew I was wrong. It extended a long hand and his fingers were pale, bony, and far too long, with sharp nails that scraped through the air. "Your life," he said simply. My throat tightened. and I knew immediately he wasn't speaking figuratively. I could feel it, like the air around me was thickening, each breath harder than the one before. But I didn't stop. I lunged toward him, the knife aimed directly at his chest. The motion was useless. Before I could even reach him, his hand grasped mine with a freezing, unyielding grip. The knife clattered to the floor, its metallic sound sharp and inevitable. "Always so predictable," he said as he closed the distance. I felt trapped, powerless. But then, something clicked in my mind: my phone. With my free hand, I pulled it out of my pocket and turned it on. The screen lit up, casting its glow across his face. For the first time, it was my own face I saw, but distorted. My skin was pale and taut, my eyes completely black, and my smile, too wide, as if someone had stretched the muscles beyond their limit. I pressed the camera and took a picture. The figure shrieked, a sound that was anything but human, filling the room with an eerie, spine-chilling resonance. It released my hand and its form began to shift, unraveling like smoke under the harsh light of the screen. "You can't stop me," it hissed, its voice splintering. To this day, I don't know exactly what I faced that night. I've never seen it again, but I know deep down that it isn't over. Sometimes, when I walk past a mirror, I notice something off in my reflection, a smile that's too wide, a flash of darkness in my eyes. And every night at exactly 3:17 a.m., my phone buzzes with a message: "I'll come back for what belongs to me." Since that night at the motel, I've tried to regain some sense of normalcy in my life, though I know it's an impossible task. I moved to a new city, changed my phone number, and even quit my job. But things never went back to the way they were. Sometimes, when I'm alone at home, I feel the familiar hum of my phone. Even when it's off, when it has no battery, it always happens at 3:17 a.m. I never have the courage to check the messages. The sensation of being watched, of being followed, has never fully gone away. Now it's more subtle, like a shadow at the edge of my vision or a chill crawling up my spine when I'm in an empty place. But the worst part is the reflection. Mirrors are no longer a place of peace. Whenever I look at myself, I expect to see that twisted smile or those black eyes. So far, everything seems normal. But the fear never leaves me. 3 nights ago, something happened that made me write this. I woke up at 3:17 a.m., as usual. No buzzing, no knocks on the door, just silence. I decided to get up, check the locks, and walk around a bit to calm myself down. As I passed the bathroom mirror, something made me stop. My reflection was there, just as it should have been. But as I walked away, I saw it move. At first, it stood still with that impossibly wide smile that wasn't mine. Then, it raised one hand and waved at me. Since that moment, I've covered all the mirrors in my apartment. I live with the lights on and barely sleep. But I know, deep down, it doesn't matter what I do. The thing will always come back. The reflection is always waiting. And eventually, I will disappear too. I first noticed it while filling up my tank at a gas station off the highway. It was around 11:30 p.m., and I was returning from a meeting in Portland. The gas station's coffee and peanut butter cookies were the only things keeping me awake on the drive. The station was old, one of those with manual pumps and a flickering neon sign. The only sound that filled the air was the hum of the old equipment, and the occasional chirping of a cricket in the darkness as the bombs slowly moved forward, my eyes fixed on an old Buick, a 70s model, parked across the lot. It was dark, maybe navy blue or black. The windows were completely fogged from the inside, as if someone had been breathing there for hours. I tried to convince myself that someone was just sleeping in the car, maybe a trucker taking a break, but something about it didn't feel right. I filled up the tank, replaced the nozzle, and walked toward the store to pay. Inside, the clerk looked bored, absorbed in his phone. I bought another coffee, even though I didn't need it, just to have an excuse to delay and glance at the Buick once more. When I stepped outside, something caught my attention. A tall figure was standing behind the station, barely visible in the shadows of the building. It was hard to make out any details, but it seemed to be staring in my direction, motionless, like a statue. I quickened my pace, feeling a knot in my stomach, and slammed the car doors shut. I started the engine and drove out of the parking lot faster than I should have. The first few minutes on the road were calm. The headlights of my car illuminated the empty road, flanked by dark trees. I kept checking the mirrors, but there was nothing. Then the old, yellowish headlights appeared, low, like those of an old car. They were far at first, but the shapes seemed familiar. The Buick. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. Just a coincidence, I told myself. It's going in the same direction. But every time I accelerated, the headlights matched my speed. When I slowed down, they did too. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the road, but I couldn't stop looking in the rearview mirror. The headlights were always there, unchanging. The Buick turned on its high beams, flooding my car with white light. My car swerved as I instinctively turned the wheel, almost going off the road. Fear started to replace logic. The Buick kept its distance, always behind me, as if playing with me. I tried to calm myself, but my breathing was shallow and rapid, and my hands were sweating on the wheel. The road curved ahead. I took the turn a little faster than I should have, my tires screeching as my body leaned with the inertia. The Buick did the same, maneuvering with ease, as if it were mimicking every move I made. I tried to remind myself that I was alone on a deserted road, that it was probably just an annoyed driver or a prankster, but something still didn't feel right. I passed a sign that said, "Next service is 47 miles. My gas gauge was already close to a quarter tank. I'll make it, I thought, even though I knew at the pace I was going, my gas wouldn't last that long. The Buick came closer now, and I could see the details of its hood in my mirror, and something else. Smudges on the windows. No, not smudges, handprints. Handprints pressed against the inside of the fogged-up glass, as if someone was trapped inside, desperate to get out. My eyes snapped back to the road just in time to avoid drifting out of my lane. I slammed the accelerator, and the Honda responded, the engine growling as I picked up speed, 0, 85, 90. The Buick was still there, mirroring every movement, never getting closer or pulling farther away. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I shakily reached over, picked it up, and quickly checked it. Unknown number. I let it ring. Then, a message arrived. "Why are you in such a hurry?" A chill ran down my spine. I dropped the phone on the seat and refocused on the road. Another message came through. "We're catching up." I checked my mirrors again. The Buick's headlights were still there, unwavering. 10 more minutes passed. My nerves were shot, and every sound from the engine, every shadow on the road, made me jump. Then I saw a sign. "Rest area next exit," and something else. A police car parked under the lights. The blue siren lights flashed toward the nearby trees. My relief was instant. I sharply turned off the highway, letting the tires crunch on the gravel. I stopped near the patrol car and I had just turned off the engine when I stumbled out of the car, barely able to keep my balance. The officer stepped out of his vehicle, looking confused as I made my way toward him, mumbling. "Is everything all right?" he asked, glancing over my shoulder toward the road. "Someone's following me," I said, pointing toward the Buick. But when I turned to look back at the road, it was empty. There was no sign of the yellow headlights, no trace of the old Buick. It was just gone. "It was right there," I murmured, suddenly feeling ridiculous. The officer frowned, clearly skeptical. "Why don't you get back in your car? I'll follow you for a couple of miles to make sure everything's okay." I nodded, still trembling, and made my way back to my car. I closed the door, locked it, and started the engine. The Honda purred weakly, a sound that used to comfort me but now barely managed to soothe my frayed nerves. The officer waved me on, signaling for me to follow, and we both returned to the road. His blue lights flickered in the distance, a beacon of safety helping me hold it together. For the first few minutes, everything seemed normal. My hands gripped the wheel tightly, my eyes darting between the mirrors and the road ahead. But then, once again, the phone on the passenger seat buzzed. Another message popped up on the screen. "Do you think he can help you?" My stomach dropped, the words hitting me like a punch. I ignored the phone, focusing instead on the police car ahead of me. But the vibrations kept coming, one after another, filling the car with a constant buzzing sound. I couldn't resist. On the next turn, I glanced at the phone. Another notification appeared. "We're closer than you think." My breath became shallow, my chest tightening. I checked the rearview mirror, and there it was, the yellow headlights of the Buick, impossibly close again, right behind me, as if it had never left. The officer in front didn't seem to notice anything. In desperation, I honked the horn, trying to get his attention. "Stop!" I shouted out loud, even though I knew he couldn't hear me. I floored the accelerator, trying to reach him, but in the mirror, the Buick also sped up, closing the distance between us. Then, the patrol car's lights began to flicker, fading slowly. No, it wasn't just the lights. The car itself was fading into the darkness, as if it had never been there at all. "No, no, no," I whispered, my throat tightening in panic. I swerved the wheel sharply to the left and slammed on the brakes. The Buick also stopped, its engine cutting off with a deep rumble. The air in the car felt thick, like I couldn't breathe properly. I stared into the rearview mirror, expecting to see the Buick's headlights again, but they were gone. I turned back to the front, and there it was, stationary, right in the middle of the road, closer than ever before. The windows were still fogged up, and handprints covered the glass, but now they were moving, as if someone, or something, was pounding from the inside, trying to get out. My phone buzzed again. With trembling hands I picked it up. The screen read, "There's no escape." The Buick's lights flickered once, then turned off, plunging the road into complete darkness. The Honda's engine roared to life as I slammed my foot on the gas, launching myself forward. I sped down the road at an unsustainable pace, praying to find a sign of life, any sign. A town, anything that could pull me out of this nightmare. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. The road stayed empty, the trees closing in around me like a suffocating wall. My gas tank was dangerously low. Finally, I saw a green sign, "Next exit, 24-hour diner, 1 mile." For the first time in hours, a flicker of hope ignited inside me. I took the exit, and at the end of the road, I saw the diner lights illuminating a small gravel lot. 3 cars were parked there, an old truck, a van, and a black sedan. Froze my blood as I saw it. It was the Buick. I stopped abruptly, just a few meters from the parking lot, my car's engine still running. My phone vibrated one last time. "Time to taste the cake," the message read. It hit me like a direct punch to the chest. My hands were frozen on the wheel, trembling, as I stared at the Buick parked in front of the diner. The yellowish light from the 24-hour sign illuminated the car, highlighting the fogged-up windows and handprints that now seemed to pulse with life of their own. "Don't go in," I told myself. But deep down, I knew I had no choice. The gas tank was nearly empty. My only option was to go into the diner, make the call, and somehow find a way to escape this nightmare. I shut off the engine and carefully opened the door, as if any sudden movement could trigger something worse. The air was cold, with a strange metallic scent I couldn't place. As I stepped into the diner, the bell above the door jingled, far too loudly for my frayed nerves. The place was empty, save for a waitress behind the counter. She had her hair tied up in a messy bun, her face weary. Her name tag read, Linda, what can I get you? She asked, not even looking up from the coffee she was pouring. Just gas, and a coffee, I muttered, trying to sound calm. Linda nodded, setting the coffee pot aside to pull a key from a drawer behind the counter. The pumps are outside. You'll need this key to turn them on, she said, placing it on the counter. I reached for it, but something made me stop. The reflection in the metal of the key wasn't mine. It was his face, the man from the Buick, his black eyes and that impossible smile. I quickly withdrew my hand, my breath quickening. Are you okay? Linda asked, leaning forward. Her voice was genuine, but the room seemed colder all of a sudden. I glanced around, trying to ignore the chill crawling up my spine. The diner was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of a clock. Suddenly, the bell above the door jingled again. I spun around. There he was, the man from the Buick. Standing there in his dark suit, that wide grin on his face, his eyes completely black. I knew you'd come, he said. His voice was soft but firm. Linda didn't seem to notice anything strange. Can I get you something, Han? She asked him. Oh, no, he replied, eyes fixed on me. I'm just here to make sure you taste the cake. Linda nodded as if there was nothing odd about his words, then disappeared into the kitchen. The man slowly approached, each step echoing like thunder in my ears. All this time running, he said, sitting down in front of me. Aren't you tired? My words caught in my throat. What do you want? I managed to whisper. His smile widened even more. Just understand this, you can't escape. Not this road, not this diner, not this moment. If we finish here, it's destiny. Linda returned with a plate of peach pie. Here you go, she said, setting it in front of me. I looked at the pie. It looked perfect, too perfect. The peaches gleamed as if varnished, and the smell was sweet, almost intoxicating. Eat, said the man. I don't want to, I replied, pulling away from the plate. His black eyes glinted with dangerous intensity. Eat, he repeated, his tone now harsher. My heart was ready to burst. Trembling, I took the fork and cut a small piece of the pie. The first bite was sweet, just as I had expected. Then something metallic filled my mouth, cold and cruel. My vision began to blur. The man smiled, satisfied. Told you, he whispered, as everything around me faded. The sky over the old Henderson farm was a leaden gray when I decided to return. I had no other choice. My savings had run out faster than I anticipated after running away, and the city, its constant noise and lights, no longer gave me the sense of security I once thought it offered. I had heard about buyers interested in the property, but none had finalized the deal. The place still sat there, waiting, as if calling me back. Finally, one night, driven by desperation, and perhaps something deeper that I didn't want to admit, I packed up and returned to where it all began. The dirt road leading to the farm was narrower than I remembered, overgrown weeds claiming more territory. The rusty silo cut against the sky, and the house looked older, more tired, as if time had rushed on in my absence. The for sale sign still hung there, crooked on its post. I parked the car and sat there, staring at the house through the window. The feeling of being watched hit me immediately, a familiar weight. The oppressive feeling that gripped my chest. I forced myself to get out of the car, my boots crushing the wet ground as I made my way toward the house. I noticed that something had changed. The windows were covered with boards, but one of the upper floor planks had been torn off. There were marks on the window frame, as if something with claws had shredded it. When I opened the door, the air inside the house was thick, not just with dust or moisture, but with something else, something heavy, almost tangible. Everything was as I had left it. The furniture covered with sheets, the dining table with a fine layer of dust, and the old clock on the wall, frozen at 3:17 in the morning. That hour. that exact hour. I started unpacking, trying to convince myself that this time things would be different. I tried to rationalize it, just an old house. Everything that had happened before was in my head, a product of loneliness and isolation. But the nights were the same, if not worse. The first night I slept in the house, the footsteps started again, heavy, slow, crossing the floor upstairs. I didn't go up to investigate. I just lay there, the rifle tight in my hands, staring at the closed door of my bedroom. The second night, I found footprints in the mud outside. This time, they were larger, deeper, as if something heavier than any human or animal I knew had been there, walking around the house. The third night, I woke up to a loud knock on the front door. Knock, knock, knock. My heart pounded like a drum. I got up, turned on the flashlight, and approached the door. There was no one there. But on the floor, I found another note. This one wasn't written on paper like before. It was carved into the wood of the door. "You can't escape." Panic gripped me. But this time, I didn't run. I didn't pack up and flee. Instead, I went down to the basement. The basement had always been the part of the house I avoided the most. The wooden stairs creaked as if they were about to collapse, and the air down there was stale, musty, and something else, something rancid. But something told me that if I wanted answers, if I wanted to understand what was chasing me, I had to start there. The flashlight illuminated the bare stone walls, covered in years of dirt and cobwebs. Everything seemed normal, except for one corner. The stones there were darker, as if they had been burned, and on the floor in front of that corner, someone had drawn symbols in a dark color, faded but still visible. The central symbol was a circle, surrounded by twisted lines that seemed to represent human figures, all facing inward. And in the center of the circle, something was buried. I started digging with my hands, pulling at the heavy, damp earth. Finally, my fingers brushed against something hard and cold. It was a metal box, locked with a rusty padlock. I ran up the stairs with the box and placed it on the dining table. Using a crowbar, I broke the padlock open. Inside, I found 3 things: an old, worn diary, a strange knife with a carved bone handle, and a small jar filled with what looked like ashes. I opened the diary. The pages were filled with uneven handwriting, crossed-out words, and sentences that seemed to ramble. But one passage stood out: "The sacrifice must remain sealed. If you release it, it will never stop. It will move from body to body, from place to place, always searching, always hungry." That night, the footsteps didn't stop. For the first time, they weren't just upstairs. They were everywhere, in the ceiling, in the walls. Something was awake. Something I couldn't ignore. With the knife in one hand and the jar in the other, I made my way back to the basement. With each step I took toward the basement, the house seemed to vibrate, as if something deep within its core had awakened. I was desperate to escape, my steps echoing around me, louder, faster, more insistent. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, the air felt heavy, suffocating. A chill pierced through me, sinking deep into my bones, yet I was sweating as if it were the peak of summer. The burnt corner of the wall appeared even darker now, and the marks on the floor were sharper, more defined. The human figures surrounding the circle seemed to move under the flickering light of my flashlight. Though I knew it was impossible, at least, I wanted to believe it was. I opened the jar containing the ashes, my hands trembling as I read the words from the journal. The sacrifice must remain sealed. I had to return whatever had been buried here, seal it forever. I poured the ashes into the circle. A cold wind filled the basement, impossible in such a confined space. The light from my flashlight flickered. Then I heard it. A whisper, soft at first: "You can't stop us." Then came laughter, no single voice, but many, all mixed together, resonating inside my head. I dropped the empty jar and grabbed the knife, backing toward the stairs. The walls began to tremble, and the floor creaked under my feet. The circle on the ground glowed with a red light, and from the burnt corner, a figure emerged. It was tall, far taller than it should have been, with long, twisted limbs. Its face was a mass of shadows, but in the center there were eyes, too many eyes, all staring at me, blinking in unison. "We warned you to leave," the voice boomed, not coming from its mouth but from everywhere, vibrating in my chest, echoing in my ears. Without thinking, I lifted the knife and threw it toward the figure. The blade spun in the air, but it didn't strike. The figure simply dissolved into black smoke, swirling around the circle before shooting toward me. The smoke enveloped me, cold and suffocating at the same time. I felt something enter my head, my chest, my very soul. I fell to my knees, screaming as the world around me grew darker. I woke at dawn, sprawled on the basement floor. My flashlight was off, but weak sunlight filtered through a crack in the ceiling. Everything was silent. The circle had vanished. The burnt corner was intact, as if it had never been touched. The knife and jar lay beside me, but the journal had turned to ashes. I stumbled to my feet. When I stepped out onto the porch, I saw the "for sale" sign lying on the ground. The paint on the letters looked fresh, as if it had been repainted the night before. Inside my car, I found a note on the driver's seat: "We warned you." I left the farm that very day. I didn't stop until the house disappeared behind the horizon. Now I'm in a motel, trying to piece together what happened, trying to forget. But I know I'm not alone. The wind whispers things in the night, words I don't want to hear. And every time I close my eyes, I see those eyes, too many eyes, blinking, waiting. I don't know if they were sealed, as the journal said, or if they just let me go for now. But something tells me I haven't finished with them yet. Something tells me they haven't finished with me. It's been 3 days since I left the Henderson farm, and each one has been worse than the last. No matter how far I drive or how safe the motel room seems, I feel their presence. It's like the air is heavier, like the shadows stretch a little longer than normal. On the 3rd day, while I was at a gas station in a small town, I noticed something strange. The cashier, an old man with a scruffy beard, stared at me intently while I paid. "You were at the Henderson farm," he said. The air caught in my throat. "What do you know about that farm?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but my voice trembled. The man leaned forward, his gray eyes gleaming with something I couldn't quite place. "Nothing good comes from that place. You shouldn't have gone into the basement." I froze. "How do you know that?" He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was a mixture of pity and something darker. "I'm not the first to see you run out of there. People always think they can face them, but they don't leave with you. You leave with them." I wanted to ask more, but something in his tone stopped me. I took my change and left quickly, feeling his eyes on my back until I reached the car. That night, things escalated. I was lying in bed, the Henderson farm knife beside me. Since I found it, I haven't dared to put it far from me. It was 3:01 in the morning when it all began. First, the wind, a low howl, seeming to come from everywhere, even with the windows closed. Then, the footsteps, louder this time, directly in the hallway outside my door. I sat up, clutching the knife with a trembling hand. The motel door began to shake as though someone was gently knocking, but insistently. "Knock, knock, knock. Leave me alone!" I screamed, though I knew it wouldn't do any good. The knocking stopped and for a moment, everything fell silent. My heart was pounding fiercely in my chest, so intensely that I thought it might explode. Then the voice came. "You belong to us." It wasn't a whisper, it was a chorus. Dozens, maybe hundreds of voices speaking in unison, filling the room like a roar. The lamp exploded, plunging the room into complete darkness. The only light came from a crack in the door, and through that crack, I saw something. Eyes. Dozens of them, watching me from the darkness of the hallway. It was then that I understood. I will never escape. I'm writing this from the car. I'm parked on the outskirts of the city, too scared to stay at the motel, but with nowhere else to go. The Henderson farm was just the beginning. What I released in the basement can't be sealed again. I don't know how much time I have left, but I'm sure of one thing. If anyone finds this, heed my warning. Don't go to the Henderson farm, and if you ever see eyes in the darkness, don't look too long. The first time I heard about the marble door, I thought it was just an urban legend, one of those stories passed around in whispers to scare the curious. According to the rumors, it was found in the basement of an abandoned building to the east of the city, in a factory that had been shut down decades ago after a mysterious fire. The door was tall, almost perfect in its construction, a block of polished white marble that contrasted with the decay of the building. It had no handle, lock, or visible hinges, but those who dared to approach said they felt something, a pull, a presence, and a whisper. Open it! Of course, the rules were clear: never touch the door, never respond to the whisper, and under no circumstances ever attempt to open it. I didn't believe in those stories, but my friend Lucas did. He had always been the curious type, the one who pushed boundaries. So when he disappeared after talking about investigating the door, I knew I had to go after him. I arrived just after dusk. The facade was covered in graffiti, the windows shattered, and the air around it smelled of rusted metal and something else, something sweet, but unpleasant. I pushed open the heavy front door, which creaked loudly. The inside was in ruins, debris, broken furniture, and an echo that made every step sound like a thud in my chest. Lucas had sent me one last location before disappearing, the south room of the basement. I found it, and descended the concrete stairs, my flashlight illuminating the dust suspended in the air. The basement was larger than I expected, with endless hallways that seemed to wind in every direction. Then I saw it, at the end of a narrow hallway framed by brick walls covered in moss, the marble door. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. The surface was so smooth that it reflected the light from my flashlight. But as I got closer, I felt something strange, a pressure in my chest, as if the very air itself was resisting my presence. And then I heard it. Open it! The voice came from nowhere in particular. It was neither male nor female, just there. Lucas? Are you here? I called out, my voice echoing down the hallway. Silence. I looked around for signs of my friend and found a backpack lying against the wall. It was his. Inside, there was a notebook, a lighter, and... With a broken lantern, I pulled out my notebook and began to read its hasty notes. The door was calling to me. I could feel something behind it, something important. I had to open it. There was no other choice. My stomach twisted. There were more scribbled notes, barely legible. It's not what it seems. It's not a door. They want out. Don't open the door. The words repeated over and over on the last pages. Don't open the door. Don't open the door. The pull became stronger as I approached. The marble door seemed to vibrate slightly. Even though the air around it was still, I felt a presence behind me. I spun around quickly, but no one was there. Then the voice returned, louder this time. Open it. You need to. My hand trembled as I touched the marble surface. It was cold, much colder than it should have been. Something inside me screamed to stop, but another part, a darker part, was fascinated. I closed my eyes and pushed. The world changed. The hallway disappeared, and I found myself standing in a dark field beneath a sky devoid of stars. Everything was covered by a thick fog that seemed to move of its own accord. The ground was soft and damp, and in the distance, I could see shadows moving, humanoid, but distorted. Lucas! I yelled, but my voice was swallowed by the fog. One of the shadows stopped and turned toward me. Though it had no face, I felt its gaze. He's here! A voice whispered inside my head. I moved closer, each step sinking deeper into the boggy ground. When I was close enough, I saw that the shadow wasn't a person, but something else, tall, thin, with limbs that stretched and shortened with every movement. In its hands it held Lucas's backpack. "Where is he?" I demanded, though my voice sounded weak, even to me. The shadow stretched out an arm, pointing into the distance. Then I saw him. Lucas was kneeling on the ground, hunched over as if praying. I approached him, but when I touched him, he crumbled into black ashes that scattered in the wind. The shadows began to draw closer, their movements erratic and unnatural. The voice returned, but this time it wasn't a whisper. It was a roar that made the ground tremble beneath my feet. "Return. Bring more." I woke up, lying in the basement, in front of the marble door. My lantern was off, but moonlight filtered through a crack in the wall. The door was closed, pristine, as if nothing had happened. I got up, staggering, with Lucas's backpack still in my hands. I left the building without looking back. I never spoke of what I saw, but I know the door is still there, waiting. And I know that one day, I'll hear its voice again. "Open it!" For weeks after my experience with the marble door, I tried to convince myself it had been a hallucination. Maybe exhaustion, the desperation to find Lucas, had clouded my judgment. But every night, when I closed my eyes, I saw that dark field and the shadows moving in the fog. I heard the voice again. "Return. Bring more." I couldn't ignore it, but I also couldn't understand it. What did "bring more" mean? Why was it calling me? Lucas's backpack remained in my apartment, a constant reminder of what had happened. I couldn't bring myself to get rid of it. One night, as I was trying to sleep, I heard a sound from the living room, a faint rustling, like fabric brushing against something. I got out of bed, feeling the cold floor beneath my feet. In the living room, the backpack was open. I hadn't touched it since I returned. On the floor next to it was a folded piece of paper. I didn't recognize it as one of Lucas's belongings. I picked it up with trembling hands and unfolded it. There was a drawing in black ink, the marble door, surrounded by human figures like shadows, kneeling in front of it. Beneath the drawing was a phrase: "Every sacrifice strengthens the bond." I knew I couldn't ignore this anymore. Whatever was behind the door wouldn't stop. And if Lucas was trapped, maybe there was a way to free him. The next night, I returned to the abandoned building. The air was heavier than the first time. Each step I took toward the basement felt harder, as if something were trying to stop me. When I reached the hallway where the door stood, I noticed something different. The brick walls were covered in marks, scratches that hadn't been there before. There, on the ground in front of the marble door, was a pile of black ashes. I knelt down to them, hoping that they weren't what I feared. But as soon as I touched them, a cold sensation shot through my body. They were the same ashes in which Lucas had crumbled in that other place. The shadows weren't just behind the door anymore, they were here with me. The voice greeted me before I even touched the surface. "You've returned. Choose." My throat closed. "Choose what?" I asked, though deep down I already knew the answer. "One enters. One remains." The door trembled, as though it was responding to the voice. I understood its meaning. If I wanted to free Lucas, someone would have to take his place. A sacrifice. My legs wobbled as I moved closer. I placed my hands on the cold marble, and the pressure on my chest intensified. "And if I don't choose?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The voice roared, filling the basement and shaking the dust from the cracks in the ceiling. "Then they all fall." I don't know how long I stood there, battling with the decision. I could see the image in my mind, the figures kneeling in front of the door, and I finally understood what it all meant. It wasn't just Lucas. There were others before him, and there would be others after me. All of us trapped by curiosity, all of us lured by the same empty promise. Bring more. That was the cycle. Someone enters, and someone remains behind, forever choosing to continue the sacrifice. I took a step back, pulling away from the door. "They'll come for you," the voice echoed. The door lit up briefly, like a silent lightning strike, before going completely opaque. The pressure in the air disappeared, but the emptiness settled deep inside me. I ran out, leaving Lucas's backpack behind. I knew I wouldn't return. Months later, I tried to rebuild my life. I moved to another state, took a job that didn't require late hours, and avoided any place that remotely resembled that building. But the voice never left. Sometimes, in my dreams, I see the marble door. Sometimes, while walking through busy streets, I feel the presence of the shadows behind me, moving just out of my line of sight. And I always hear those words. "They'll come for you." I can't escape it. One day, someone else will find the door. Someone else will be called. And when that happens, I hope they're stronger than I was, because this cycle has no end. The fluorescent sign of Jerry's Diner flickered against the darkness of Highway 43. I needed coffee. My eyes burned after 12 hours of non-stop driving, and those cheap energy drinks were no longer doing the trick. I parked my Honda Civic in the gravel lot, the headlights illuminating 3 other vehicles, a cargo truck, an old Chevy pickup, and a black sedan I couldn't identify in the darkness. The bell over the door jingled as I entered. The smell of burnt coffee and grease hit me immediately. A tired-looking waitress was wiping down the counter, and an old man sat hunched over a newspaper in a booth at the far corner. Behind the kitchen window, I could hear something sizzling on the grill and the clinking of plates. I sank onto a red vinyl stool at the counter, my joints stiff from being seated for so long. The waitress, whose name tag said Linda, came over with a coffee pot. "Tough night?" she asked, already pouring without waiting for my answer. "Long trip," I replied, wrapping my hands around the hot mug. "Still got about 4 more hours to go." The bell jingled again. I didn't turn around, focused on adding sugar to my coffee. But I felt someone sit 2 stools down from me. With my peripheral vision, I noticed it was a man wearing a dark jacket. "Hey," he said, his voice unusually cheerful for 1 a.m. "You headed north on 43? I glanced at him briefly, noting his clean-shaven face. His perfectly styled hair seemed far too neat for this hour, as if he had just walked out of an office rather than off a long trip. I responded, returning my focus to my coffee. "You must have left Nashville around noon, right? That construction zone on I-24 was brutal today." My hand froze halfway to my mouth. He hadn't mentioned Nashville or I-24. The traffic jam near exit 47 had been endless, he continued, still cheerful. "Good thing you found that alternate route through the suburbs. It saved you at least an hour." I slowly set my cup down on the counter. I had taken a detour through the suburbs to avoid the traffic. The ceramic clinked lightly against the surface. "I know you," I asked finally. He turned to face me. "No, but I saw you at the Shell station in Lebanon. You bought that chicken sandwich for lunch, the one with pickles." My stomach clenched. I had stopped at a Shell in Lebanon 6 hours ago, and yes, I had bought a chicken sandwich with pickles. "You've got a great memory," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, I noticed the details," he replied, tapping his fingers on the counter. His fingers were long and pale, like when you called your wife at the rest stop near Bowling Green, the one with the broken vending machine. "You told her you'd be home by morning." My heart began to race. I hadn't seen anyone following me. I had been checking my mirrors regularly, an old habit from when I used to drive late through dangerous neighborhoods. "Look, I don't know what game you're playing," I started to say. "And that gas station in Portland with the flickering lights?" He interrupted, still laughing. "The attendant was asleep. You had to knock 3 times to wake him up. You bought a Red Bull and those peanut butter cookies. The orange package, not the yellow one." I stood up so quickly the stool screeched against the floor. Linda looked up from the cash register, but the man made a reassuring gesture with his hand. "Just catching up with an old friend," he said. She went back to counting bills. "I'm leaving," I said, pulling a $10 bill from my wallet and setting it on the counter. My hands were trembling. "Drive carefully," he said. "It's dark out there. Lots of deer along this stretch. It would be a shame if something happened to you before you got home." I walked to the door as quickly as I could without running. The bell above the door jingled too loudly. The cold air hit me like a slap when I stepped outside. My car was exactly where I had left it, but somehow it looked different under the dim lights of the farthest lot. My clumsy fingers dropped the keys once before I managed to unlock the door. Inside, I locked all the doors and started the engine. The dashboard clock read 1:17 a.m. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel. I looked toward the diner windows. The man was standing by the counter, staring at my car. He raised his hand in a friendly wave, then smiled again, wider this time. Even through the glass and distance, I could see his eyes clearly. They were completely black. Not just the irises. Everything visible in both eyes was as dark as oil. I hit the accelerator and put the car in reverse. The wheels kicked up gravel as I turned toward the highway. The car swayed slightly, but I kept my foot firm on the gas. In the rearview mirror, I could still see him standing by the diner window, waving. My heart was pounding so hard I could hardly breathe. The speedometer climbed to 80, then 90. I didn't care about speeding tickets. I just needed distance. After 10 minutes of driving, my phone started vibrating in the passenger seat. Unknown number. I let it ring. A text notification popped up on the screen. Against my better judgment, I took a quick glance around the next curve. "You forgot your receipt, and you really should have tried the pie. Linda makes it fresh every day." I threw the phone onto the back seat. My hands were shaking so badly I had to slow down to keep control of the car. Another message came in. I heard the buzz, then another, and then, every vibration made me jump. The messages kept coming in, one after the other, as if someone was typing frantically. The next curve revealed a rest area ahead. I slammed on the brakes and turned toward the entrance, tires screeching. I needed to turn off my phone, maybe call the police, although I wasn't sure what I would even tell them. As I leaned over to the back seat to grab my phone, the headlights of another car flashed across my rearview mirror. A black sedan stopped right beside me. I didn't wait to see who was getting out. I shifted the car into drive and sped out of the rest area, my heart pounding in my throat. The sedan's headlights appeared in my rearview mirror almost instantly. Seconds passed, and the road stretched out, empty before me, a black strip under my headlights. The sedan stayed exactly 3 car lengths behind me, matching my speed no matter if I sped up or slowed down. The gas gauge was at half a tank. I could drive for a few more hours without stopping, but eventually I'd need fuel. The thought of that made my stomach churn. A green sign appeared, reading, "Next services in 10 miles. The sedan's headlights remained steady in my mirror, neither getting closer nor pulling away. It was just there. My phone buzzed again in the back seat. This time, the sound was different, a pattern, 3 short vibrations, 3 long ones, and 3 short ones again. Morse code. The radio turned on by itself, static crackling at first, then a voice breaking through the white noise. "The cake was excellent today. Peach. Your favorite." I jerked the wheel, nearly colliding with the semi-truck I was overtaking. The truck's horn blared as I swerved back into my lane. "You should have tried it." The voice continued clearly despite the static. "Linda will be so disappointed." I slammed the radio off button. Nothing. I pressed harder. "It's rude to ignore people," the voice said. "Especially when they're just trying to be friendly." In a panic, I yanked the volume knob off, but the voice didn't fade. "Like that nice woman at the Shell station. The one who helped you find the chicken sandwiches." You didn't even thank her properly. My hands were frozen on the wheel. The sedan's headlights remained constant behind me, unwavering. Sleeping in Portland. You just hit and hit until she woke up. What if you'd asked how her night was? The voice was now breathing in short gasps, as though it were close. My peripheral vision began to fade into darkness. But now we can talk, the voice said cheerfully. We've got plenty of time, at least 4 hours. No. That's what you told Linda, I thought, almost in disbelief. Another sign appeared. Next services in 42 miles. The voice hummed a tune with no real melody for a few seconds. You know something interesting about that gas station in Portland? The voice continued. The security cameras haven't worked in months. The owner always wants to fix them, but well, you know how it goes with these things. My phone vibrated again, more notifications. Each buzz followed the rhythm of my heartbeat. You know what that means? The voice asked, almost teasing. It's an SOS. Funny, isn't it? People send it when they need help, but sometimes they send it when it's already too late. The sedan was still there, unshakable, like a shadow. 17 more curves until the gas station, the voice said. I could point each one out if you want. This one's especially sharp. I suggest you slow down. I didn't slow down. The Honda's tires screamed as it entered the turn, the car swaying dangerously. That was one, the voice said calmly. 16 left, unless you want to stop sooner. There's a nice spot up ahead, quiet. No cameras either. The sedan's headlights turned with mine as we navigated the curve, keeping that same perfect distance. The gas gauge was still dropping. The warning light would be on soon, maybe in less than an hour if I kept this speed. You know, the voice said again. An hour ahead, there's another diner open all night. Better coffee than Jerry's if you asked me. The voice, soft and pastel-like, made a sound of satisfaction, as though it remembered something delicious. You should try it, it said. We could stop together. The hum of the phone shifted in rhythm, leaving behind the tapping of Morse code. Now it pulsed in sync with my heartbeat, each vibration resonating in my chest as if the phone were directly connected to my body. 2, said the voice as we took another curve. 15 more. You're driving so well, considering how tired you must be. All that driving, all those energy drinks, that can't be good for you. I glanced at the speedometer. 95 miles per hour. The car wobbled slightly at this speed. The steering wheel vibrated under my hands. 3, counted the voice as I took the next curve. You know, I'm starting to worry about you. Your heart is racing too fast, and your hands must be cramping from gripping the wheel so tightly. Why don't we stop for a moment? The headlights of the sedan stayed constant, 3 car lengths behind, no matter what I did. 4, the voice continued. Did you know that the number 4 is considered unlucky in some cultures? Something about it sounding similar to the word for death. Interesting, right? My phone suddenly started playing a ringtone, now a children's song I didn't recognize. The melody was slightly off, distorted. 5, said the voice. This next stretch of highway is my favorite. No streetlights for miles, just darkness and stars. And us, of course. The engine of the Honda began to whine, emitting a sharp sound I'd never heard before. The steering wheel vibrated even more intensely. 6, said the voice. You're doing great, but you must be exhausted. All that adrenaline, it can't last forever. The gas gauge was dangerously low, and the warning light flickered on with a soft ding. 7, said the voice. We're not even halfway through the curves yet. I mean, the gas station, well, that's a different story. Did I mention the pumps are broken? It's a shame. They should fix things faster around here. The children's song on my phone grew louder, the distortion increasing. I could almost make out the words in the lyrics, but I didn't want to understand them. 8, said the voice. You know what's wonderful about this stretch of road? No cell service. There's been no signal for the last 20 minutes. Didn't you notice that your wife's calls stopped coming through? I hadn't tried calling my wife. I hadn't tried calling anyone. Ninth, the voice continued. We're almost at the good part. There's a lovely view ahead. You can see the whole valley from there. Well, normally you can. It's pretty dark tonight. The gas light flickered again. 10, counted the voice. You're running low on fuel, aren't you? Don't worry. I know a shortcut. The headlights of the sedan looked closer now, though I knew they weren't. They stayed at the same exact distance. 11, the voice said. Did you check your trunk before leaving Nashville? You should always check it. You never know what might be in there. My hands were so numb now that I couldn't feel the steering wheel anymore. 12th, the voice counted. It's almost time to make a choice. The highway splits in 3 miles. The left fork leads to the gas station. The right, well, let's just say it's more private. The children's song on my phone reached a crescendo. Finally, the words became clear, ring around the rosy. 13th, said the voice. The unfortunate number 13. You're not superstitious, are you? Of course not. A rational man like you doesn't believe in things that make noise in the night. The engine of the Honda screeched in warning, a sharp, desperate sound. 14th. The voice continued. Do you feel that? The change in the air, right before something happens, like the moment just before a storm breaks. The split in the highway came into view, the signs still too far to read. 15th. The voice said. Time to decide, left or right? Gas station or privacy? Finally, I could make out the signs, gas, left. Scenic route, right? 16th, said the voice. Just one more curve, and then we'll see what kind of driver you really are. The fork was a quarter-mile away now, the sedan's headlights burning in my rearview mirror. 17th, the voice whispered. Last chance? What are you going to choose? I jerked the wheel sharply to the left, the tires screeching. The Honda swerved, nearly veering off the road. For a moment, the sedan's headlights disappeared. I thought it was over. Then my radio crackled. Bad choice, said the voice. The headlights of the sedan reappeared, directly in front of me, now coming toward me on the highway. The sedan's headlights were coming straight at me from the opposite direction. I screamed. I gripped the steering wheel with all my might, and the car veered off the road at 90 miles per hour. For an instant, there was weightlessness, a sensation of falling that stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Then the impact. Everything shattered into fragments. When I opened my eyes, I was upside down, still strapped to my seat. Hot blood trickled down my forehead, and the engine emitted a ticking sound as it cooled. The air was thick with the smell of burning metal and gasoline. In the silence I heard footsteps, the crunch of broken glass beneath boots, slowly drawing nearer. A door creaked open. I told you, came the voice, now closer. I should have had you try the pie. I turned my head slowly, each movement sending a sharp pain through my neck. The man from the diner crouched by the shattered window of my car. His face wore that same wide, unnatural grin, and his eyes, black as oil, reflected nothing. No, he said, reaching out with his long, pale fingers. About that shortcut I mentioned. The children's song began again, clearer than ever. Ashes, ashes, we all fall down. I felt his fingers brush my arm, and my vision went black. The next morning, after a sleepless night, I tried to convince myself that it had all been a dream. Everything, the farm, the shadows, the eyes, the voices, maybe my mind had simply cracked under the stress and isolation. I drove to a cafe in the nearby town, hoping to find some semblance of normality in the noise of the place. The tables were filled with people having breakfast, the clink of cups and plates making me feel just a little more human. But the normality didn't last long. While drinking my coffee, I noticed someone sitting across the room. A man in a worn brown jacket. He looked disheveled, but what really caught my attention was the way he was staring at me. It wasn't a casual glance. It was intense, fixed, as if he was trying to memorize every detail of my face. I ignored the urge to confront him, paid my bill quickly, and left the cafe. Outside, the cool breeze hit my face, and for a moment, I let myself relax. But when I turned toward my car, there he was, standing just a few feet away. "You shouldn't have come back." His voice was gruff, heavy with warning. "Who are you?" I asked, taking a step back. The man didn't respond right away. He just tilted his chin up towards me. And then I saw it. His eyes weren't normal. In his irises there was a strange pattern, like intertwining lines moving slowly, almost imperceptibly. "They don't forget," he said. "And they never forgive." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, though I already knew the answer. "The farm, the basement, what you freed, it's with you now. It will always be with you." My heart sank. I wanted to scream that he was wrong, that I had left it all behind, but I knew it was pointless. Deep down, I knew he was right. The man took a step toward me, holding out a crumpled piece of paper. I took it with trembling hands. There was a drawing on it, a symbol identical to the one I saw in the basement, surrounded by human figures staring inward. "This is the only thing that can stop them," he said, "but it will cost you more than you're willing to give." Before I could say anything more, he turned and walked away. That night, she disappeared into an alley. I returned to the motel with the paper in my pocket, studying it over and over. The symbol seemed to pulse when I looked at it, as though it had a life of its own. I turned on the lamp by the bedside table and sat on the bed, determined to understand what it meant. But as I watched it, the light began to flicker. The wind, that cursed wind, returned, and with it the voices. "You belong to us. You will never escape." The paper grew hot in my hands, and a sharp pain shot through my head. The shadows began to move across the walls, darker and more defined than ever before. I knew I had to do something. The figure of the man, his words, everything pointed to one single destination, the farm. I drove all night, the symbol sitting in the passenger seat, like a beacon guiding me into the darkness. When I reached the farm, dawn was beginning to color the sky. The air was thick with electricity, like the calm before a storm. I knew this was my only chance. I entered the basement, feeling that every step brought me closer to the end. I laid the paper with the symbol on the floor, right where the box had ended. The shadows on the walls began to stretch and twist, forming humanoid shapes that surrounded me. "Do you think you can escape us?" The voice echoed louder than ever. "I don't belong to you," I shouted, throwing the knife into the center of the symbol. The shadows lunged at me, and everything went dark. I woke up on the basement floor hours later. The air was calm, the shadows were gone, and the symbol on the paper had faded. I don't know if I stopped them or if I just delayed them, but something had changed. I can feel it. But I know I'm not truly free. Something whispers to me in the quiet moments, telling me this story isn't over. The farm still stands, waiting for the next fool to stumble upon it. And me? I still watch the shadows, waiting for the day they return for me. For weeks after my last encounter at the Henderson farm, I believed it was finally over. The knife, the symbol, and my act of defiance seemed to have pushed them away. I moved into a small apartment in the city, surrounded by constant noise and bright lights. The peace I felt was superficial, but it was enough to keep me functional. However, it didn't take long before the signs started to reappear. The first night I noticed something strange was while I was walking home from work. I passed by a dark alley and out of the corner of my eye, I saw a tall, thin figure in the shadows. I stopped dead in my tracks. Turning quickly, I saw a hand-drawn symbol on the wall, the same symbol from the basement, with the human-like figures. This time, there was a phrase written underneath it. "We are always here." That night I couldn't sleep. The sound of the wind, the cursed wind, returned, whistling through the closed windows of my tiny apartment. The lights began to flicker, and just after midnight I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps, outside my door. I cautiously approached, the knife I had brought with me from the farm gripped tightly in my hand. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. I peered through the peephole. Nothing. But when I returned to my room, there was something scrawled on the wall, as though carved by nails. "The sacrifice is never complete." The following days were chaos. Each night, the footsteps returned. The shadows on the walls twisted into impossible shapes, and the voices grew louder. They were no longer whispers, they were demands. "Finish what you started, or give us what is ours." I had no idea what they meant. What sacrifice? What did they want from me? I began digging deeper, researching more. I went back to the town archives where I had read about the farm. This time, I looked through older documents, records that spoke of disappearances in the area long before Henderson built the farm. I found something terrifying. In the 17th century, settlers reported seeing dark beings in the nearby woods. There were stories of human sacrifices to appease them, offerings made on moonless nights. The place where the farm now stood was, according to the records, the site of those rituals. One passage in particular froze my blood. "If the sacrifice is interrupted, they bind themselves to the one who disturbs them. They persist, waiting until it is completed, or a replacement is offered." There was no escape. If I didn't finish this, they would follow me forever, and I couldn't bear to imagine what would happen if I gave up. The next night, with the knife in my hand and the symbol burned into my memory, I returned to the farm. Everything was just as I had left it, but it felt different, heavier, more oppressive. As I entered the basement, the shadows were already there, waiting. I could feel their eyes, dozens, maybe hundreds, watching me from the walls. "I'm here," I said, my voice trembling. "What do you want?" "Finish the sacrifice." The knife in my hand grew hot, as though it had a life of its own. The shadows began to move, circling around me, drawing closer with every passing second. I had no idea what to do, but something inside me, something deep and primal, guided me. I drew the symbol on the basement floor with the knife, my hands shaking but determined. Once I finished, the shadows stopped. The air grew so thick I could barely breathe. And then I heard their voices again. "Choose." Before me, two options appeared. The first was a mirror. When I looked into it, I saw my reflection, but behind me were the figures, those beings with endless eyes, waiting. The second was a vague human figure. Ethereal, floating like a ghost, I had no face, but I could still feel my humanity, my fear. The choice had to be made. A sacrifice had to happen. One of us had to be given up. In the end, I made my choice. I can't tell you what I decided. Perhaps it was fear that guided my decision, or maybe something darker, something I don't even fully understand. When it was all over, the shadows faded. The basement fell into silence, and the air grew light again. But I was no longer the same. I returned to the city, but nothing felt as it once did. I can't look in the mirror without feeling like something is watching me. The lights in my apartment never seem to shine bright enough, and every sound at night makes my nerves tense. The Henderson farm still stands there. I don't know how much time will pass before someone else is called to it, before another unsuspecting soul crosses its threshold. And me? I still live on. But I'm not truly free. Sometimes, I feel its eyes on me, even in the crowd. It says, without a doubt, that one day, they will return. The clock on my phone read 11:47 p.m. when I noticed it for the first time. The fluorescent lights of the Jefferson station buzzed above me, making everything feel faded and artificial. Only 3 other people were waiting on my platform: a nurse, likely returning from her shift at the hospital, and an elderly couple huddled together on a bench. I was exhausted after another late day at the office, barely able to keep my eyes open. Then, a movement across the tracks caught my attention. A man stood completely still on the opposite platform, staring directly at me. At first, I thought I was imagining things due to my fatigue, but no, his gaze was locked on mine with an unsettling intensity. He wore dark clothes that hung loosely from his thin frame, a baseball cap pulled low over his forehead, obscuring most of his face, but I could still feel his eyes piercing through me. My skin tingled. I shifted in place and glanced at my phone, pretending to be absorbed in something important. But when I looked up again, he hadn't moved an inch. The station speaker crackled, announcing an approaching northbound train, the roar of the train's wheels vibrating through the platform. I kept my eyes fixed ahead, deliberately avoiding looking across the tracks. The train screeched to a halt, and I boarded the second car, choosing a seat near the central doors. As the doors closed, I pulled out my phone again, hunched over it. The doors emitted their warning before closing completely. Just before they did, I heard heavy footsteps entering the car. I didn't need to look to know it was him. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as he passed my row. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him sit 2 rows behind me, across the aisle. My heart raced faster. I told myself I was being paranoid. Many people take trains late at night. The fact that someone had boarded the same car didn't mean anything. But my instincts screamed that something was wrong. The train jolted forward, picking up speed as we left the station. Through the reflection in the window, I could see him. He wasn't looking around like a normal passenger. His eyes were fixed on me, unblinking. His face remained partially hidden beneath the cap, but his still posture made me feel like I was being watched. I opened my work email on my phone, trying to appear calm, though my mind was racing. There were 4 stops left before mine. The car wasn't crowded, but there were enough people for me to feel somewhat safe. The nurse sat at the far end, while a group of college students joked near the front. An older man napped by the doors. When we reached the next stop, I made a decision. If this man followed me when I changed cars, I would know for sure that it wasn't a coincidence. I stood up as the train began to slow. Grabbing my bag, I quickly walked toward the door connecting to the next car. I barely crossed over to the other side before I found a new seat. 10 seconds passed. 15, maybe? Was I being paranoid after all? Then, the door between cars slowly opened. His gaze locked onto mine immediately. He sat directly in front of me, 1 seat ahead, across the aisle. My mouth went dry. The car was nearly empty now, just the 2 of us. 2 stops left. Sweat beaded on my skin. I stayed still, not daring to move, gripping my bag strapped tightly. The man rose from his seat, and he walked toward me. But he didn't stop. He positioned himself just behind me. I could hear his slow, uneven breath, as though he was trying to control it. The train plunged into darkness for a moment as the fluorescent lights flickered. I felt something brush the back of my neck, and I shuddered, spinning around sharply. But he was still standing there, unmoving. The speaker blared, announcing, "Next stop, Central Station," as the train began to slow down. I stood up and walked toward the doors, feeling him move behind me. The doors hissed open, and I stepped onto the platform, forcing myself to keep a normal pace. His footsteps echoed behind me. The station was nearly empty, only a janitor pushing a cleaning cart in the distance. I quickened my pace, feeling his presence closing in. As I reached the main entrance of the lobby, I broke into a run. The sound of my shoes slapping against the tiled floor mixed with the heavier footsteps trailing me. I sharply turned the corner, nearly crashing into a trash can. He caught up to me, and something slammed into my back, sending me crashing to the ground. my bag flew from my shoulder. Before I could get up, I felt hands grabbing my shoulders and my face. My own eyes, nose, and jaw stared back at me, but his skin was pale, almost translucent, as if it hadn't seen the sunlight in years. Deep bags hung under his eyes, and although his hair was similar to mine, it looked dull and messy. He smiled, and his cracked lips revealed yellowed, crooked teeth. "I finally caught you," he said, his voice a rough imitation, as if he wasn't used to speaking. "Do you know how long I've been searching for you? How many stations I've waited at? How many trains I've ridden?" His breath smelled of rusted metal. I struggled to break free, but he was surprisingly strong. "Who are you?" I managed to scream, my voice cracking. "What do you want? Don't you remember?" he asked, leaning closer. His smile widened, and his voice turned into a whisper full of resentment. "The mistake at the hospital. 2 babies so like they could have been twins. One went home with a wealthy family. The other..." His fingers dug painfully into my shoulders. "The other ended up in the foster system." His voice trembled with rage. "From home to home, from school to school, always out of place, never enough. But I found it. I found the records. I found you." My head was spinning. "You're crazy!" I yelled, trying to break free. "That's impossible." "Impossible! Look at me," he demanded. "Look at me closely. We could have been twins. We should have been twins. But they gave you my life." He pulled something from his pocket, something that glinted under the light. It was a knife, its blade cold and sharp. "Well, tonight I'm going to take it back," he said. I felt the cold metal against my throat, and a drop of hot blood slid down my neck. I didn't scream. In a desperate move, I threw my head forward, slamming it into his face. He screamed and staggered back, clutching his nose. I seized the moment, freeing one of my arms, and elbowed him in the ribs. We both tumbled to the floor, fighting for the knife. I managed to get to my feet, swaying, my vision blurred with pure hatred. "Security!" I screamed with all my might. My voice echoed in the empty lobby. "Help!" He ignored me and lunged at me again. I rolled to the side, reaching for my bag. I swung it at his head, the hard edge of the case connecting with a sickening crack. He collapsed to the ground, motionless. I stood there, panting, still clutching my bag. Blood began to pool around his head. Finally, the sound of hurried footsteps filled the air. 2 security guards appeared at the corner, their flashlights illuminating the scene. One of them froze, staring at the body on the floor. "What the hell happened here?" he asked, reaching for his radio. I collapsed, trembling. "He tried to kill me," I rasped. The following hours passed in a blur of statements, paramedics checking my wounds, and detectives asking endless questions. When they finally let me go, it was morning. The rising sun cast a warm light over everything, but I couldn't escape the shadow of what had just happened. When I got home, I collapsed in front of the bathroom mirror. My reflection stared back at me, bruised face, a split lip, and eyes filled with terror. For a moment, I thought I saw him again, smiling behind me. But it was just my imagination. Since then, I stopped taking the train. I started driving to work, even though the downtown parking was outrageously expensive. Some nights, I still check the shadows, expecting to see him again. I feel it in the darkness, like his cold fingers are about to touch my neck again. And I wonder if things would have been different. If I had grown up with resentment, would I have become him? I don't want to know the answer. Weeks have passed since that night at the station. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, gasping, feeling as if his hands are still on my shoulders. The doctors say the tremors in my hands will fade with time. They also say the nightmares should lessen eventually. But I'm not so sure. Some things leave scars that don't fade. Sometimes I find myself thinking about what he said, about the mistake at the hospital, about two lives that should never have crossed paths. The detectives confirmed that we weren't twins. We weren't even related. We were just two people who looked strikingly alike, born on the same day in the same hospital. But that resemblance drove him to obsession. They found his apartment. It was full of photos of me, detailed notes on my routine, and recordings of my voice. He had studied it, practiced it. He had planned to replace me completely, to take my life as if it had always been his. He wasn't just a stranger. He had convinced himself that I had stolen something from him. And in his eyes, maybe I had. I don't travel by train anymore. Not even when driving is inconvenient. I can't stand the thought of being in another car, surrounded by strangers. I've installed extra locks on all the doors, cameras in the hallways of my building. I even changed my daily route, just in case. But no matter what I do, some nights, when I pass a mirror, I feel like he's still there, a shadow lurking in my reflection, waiting.